and the development of an emissions reduction strategy, working together with the community. The present focus on particulates and odours is not enough and needs extending. Since 53% of our city's emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, are from transport, we must transition with urgency to a locally manufactured electric and low emissions bus fleet. We need zero emissions by 2030, in line with the IPCC timeframes, which require a substantially front-loaded reduction, as this graph shows. It's not linear. Bus patronage levels in Christchurch are appalling, with other cities far ahead of us and demonstrating what's possible when quality service is provided. We need to increase frequency and coverage until the service is appealing. And there needs to be a significant increase in resourcing towards developing better bus services. It's not just infrastructure or buses themselves, that's staff as well. We need to get passenger rail up and running. I'm pleased that some of you are passionate about rail. However, I understand that in the 6 months since the election, the Public Transport Joint Committee has met just once. We need serious joint investment by both councils in prising people out of cars. And now that the barrier's been removed, transfer of responsibility for public transport to another body should happen urgently. In the meantime, ECAN should push the City Council hard to take initiatives that support your efforts to improve public transport. Initiatives like increased parking charges. And every time the City Council approves another parking building, they undermine your efforts to increase mode shift away from cars. Because it takes a carrot and a stick. The government-funded COVID recovery is an opportunity we mustn't miss. We need to ramp up production of the new buses and get them on the road, and here's the money. So I'm hoping you've made an application. I'm sure you have. The biggest water issue facing us is the contamination of our drinking water by nitrates. The cost of removal, the damage to human health, and the damage to aquatic species are so significant that this merits a very risk-averse approach by ECAN. Lockdown has made it really clear that we as a nation need to be able to provide for all our food needs. We need to switch away from the dairy monoculture, which the Canterbury Plains are unsuited to, both in soil and in climate, and return to diverse cropping, including grains. We need to develop a food resilience strategy in partnership with Canterbury councils and communities. A step change in resourcing is needed to address the decline in biodiversity. In particular, the insect apocalypse is well documented, and yet insects are not mentioned once in the biodiversity section of the annual plan. So I ask you to urgently action the insect recovery roadmap outlined in the journal Nature, and I've put a link there to that document. More resourcing needs to be directed towards leadership in mitigating climate change, driving emissions reductions, with district and city councils, local iwi, the farming community, the wider community, and also with central government, who you should push strongly to change all legislation that stops you acting to curb emissions. The RMA needs to be amended well before the end of 2021 so you can consider emissions in the consenting process. That's far too late, as the recent application to expand the Colgate mine demonstrates. So the annual plan, I think, is pointing in the right direction. That's a tick from me. But things need to happen much more quickly. And I just want to end by saying that you good people are our first environmental council. So many of us have huge hopes of you all. You're the ones who get how serious our situation is and how imminent. I hope you can also be the ones whose legacy to the people of Canterbury is that you made sure that we were ready. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie, for that very well articulated and presented process of your views and your requests there. We have a couple of questions coming up here in the chat box. So we've got Councillor Clearwater, Councillor Pauling and Liz McKenzie. So we'll go in that order, please.
Lovely.
Thank you for your presentation, Julie. I want to ask you about your suggestion about transferring the running of public transport to another body. And I just wanted to start by saying, do you know what the views are of the other territorial authorities, the other councils in Greater Christchurch about one TA running transport? That's my first question.
Well, I understand that the Christchurch City Council is very keen to take that in-house. I can see that there might be concerns from Selwyn and Waimak that that their needs would be looked after if it was being run by the City Council. But I feel certain that with good collaboration, that could be mitigated and addressed.
Thanks, Julie. And my other question was, you referred to the possibility of an entity like Auckland Transport running Christchurch's transport, Greater Christchurch Transport. So I just wondered, do you know how democratic Auckland Transport is as a local body? And would you comment on that?
Do I know how democratic?
Yeah, how much democracy is there, say, for the ratepayers of Auckland when their transport is run by Auckland Transport? I just wondered if you knew anything about that to help us.
Well, I guess you're referring to the fact that you're elected and the other councillors are also elected. But I want to say that a lot of the decisions on transport under the system that we have currently is actually coming from staff, and staff, let's face it, are the experts in this and need to be listened to. So I feel quite sure that you good people could come up with a governance structure of such a body that would work well for Canterbury. And what I do want to say is that the current system is not working for Canterbury, and the fact that our patronage stats are so far behind Auckland and Wellington, and until COVID even Queenstown were miles ahead of us. We're not being creative, we're not being innovative, we just seem to be stuck. And we need to do something about that. And what I can say is the current system is not working, and we need to move fast. Thanks, Phil.
Councillor Pauling.
Hi, kia ora, Chair. Kia ora, Julie. Thank you very much for your very clear submission. It's really well set out. Thanks so much. I just had two questions. One was about, I read in your submission about wanting to focus more on methane. So I wanted to ask, what would be the most important action we could do on methane?
Well, I think that, methane, the issue with methane that many people don't seem to have grasped is that methane, whilst it only stays in the atmosphere for, 12 years or so, before it decomposes. What it decomposes into, breaks down into, is carbon dioxide. So we all know that carbon dioxide is a really big problem and that it stays there for a long, long time. So what we get with methane is we get, for the first 12 years or so, we get 80 times the heating that carbon dioxide would produce, and then it breaks down into carbon dioxide and we get, you know, as if it was carbon dioxide up there. So it really, really is a big problem. It's not that after 12 years it's suddenly gone, so we don't really need to worry about it. And obviously methane comes from, primarily for us, from agriculture. And so that's the area that we need to focus on. And I mentioned in terms of my submission just now that the Canterbury Plains is not well suited to, for example, dairying. It's much more in either soil or in climate, and then the fact that we've got to engage in massive irrigation in order to facilitate that is just one example. And you know, so we need to be decreasing stock numbers. We need to be moving towards much less intensive agriculture. And I'm pleased to see that there's a number of farmers who have been quite innovative and who have decreased and are not, you know, intensive stocking, and who have actually found that they are able to achieve the same profits because they've also reduced their costs with that. In the places where the Christchurch city's water aquifer is drawn from, that's clearly not a suitable place for dairying at all. And those cows need to go. Those farmers need to be supported to move to other kinds of activity, other kinds of farming activity. So yeah, that's what I would like to see. That's where I think the methane reduction needs to come from.
Councillor
Julie, thank you.
Mackenzie. Thank you, Craig. Councillor Mackenzie, you have a quick question for Julie?
Yep. Hi, Julie.
Hi, Elizabeth.
Hi, I read your submission, which, yeah, I was very impressed with it. So my question is around the impact of forest fires on our, you know, billion trees and other various tree planting projects. How do you think ECAN could best sort of avoid having all of our efforts planting trees go up in smoke in the future?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I think that fires is a really important area that we look at, and you know, it's no good planting trees to sequester carbon if actually the end result is that they increase the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, which is what's been happening in Canada since 2001 with the boreal forest. It's quite scary. So there's been some really interesting research going on recently around what species are more resistant to fire, and pines in particular are certainly not. And so in terms of the massive New Zealand billion trees planting, it's insane to be doing what we're doing and planting pines in a lot of places. So there's also tree species which are known to recover far more quickly after a fire than others. There's a chap who's, I don't know his name, but he's out at Lincoln, and he goes around with a portable barbecue and puts leaves in them, and scientifically finds out which species burn are more susceptible to fire. But lots of native species are much more fire resistant, and those are the ones that we need to be planting.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. One quick question, Grant, to round out Julie's feedback for us. Thank you.
Hi, thanks, Julie. You sort of answered my question a wee bit when you're talking about with Craig. In terms of what we can do, in terms of the regenerative agriculture and climate change issues, do you think we need to help educate or provide support for the rural community, especially in terms of instigating some form of land use change through education, guidance, and showing how it should be done.
Yeah, thanks very much, Grant, for that question. That's a really great question. And yes, I do think that ECAN has a huge role in leadership in terms of education and advocacy around climate change mitigation. Even while some of the legislation is currently against you being able to make some of the changes that you would want or take emissions into account in the consenting process, there's so much that you can do at the moment in stepping out there, letting the public know that we actually are in a climate and ecological emergency, and actually just how severe that is going to be. COVID is nothing on what is coming if we don't take good action about this. And so educating around that, and also working together with other territorial authorities, with the science community, about the best ways to actually reduce emissions, and educating the community about what we can do there. And also with, pollution. And I guess I want to say that I know a lot of people point the finger at the farming community. I want to acknowledge that the issues are just as strong in city and urban communities, and there's a real role for education there around looking after our water quality as well, in particular.
Thank you very much, Julie, for that feedback and the answering of those questions. That's very, very much appreciated. And I wish you a good day, and I'm glad that the IT's worked for us and you this afternoon.
Lovely.
So thank you very much for that. In the interest of the time, I see we've got Peter on the line. Taryn, he's doing a phone call, is he?
That's correct. Yes, I've got him here. If everyone's ready.
Yep, we're all ready to go. So
yeah.
Welcome, Peter. Just welcome him, and then he can start presenting.
Excellent. Welcome, Peter. Now is your opportunity to present to the council, please.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm very grateful for this opportunity to address the council in relation to our concerns and interest in the long-term plan. And first of all, I'd like to welcome the statement in the plan of a commitment to facilitate more community input to water management decisions, especially as regards the working relationship between ECAN and Christchurch City Council, where we have a particular concern about the impact of freshwater management on the aquifers that supply Christchurch's drinking water. So we regard freshwater management as, among other things, a very important public health issue, particularly in respect of nitrate levels and the possibility of pollution by seawater incursion as a result of excessive extraction of water for agricultural purposes. And we hope that ECAN will be receptive, or more receptive than it seems to have been in the past, to concerns expressed by the City Council about, for example, the impact of water bottling and the impact of nitrate leaching on our water supply. The other thing I would like to refer to is the future focus of zone committees. I personally recall a public meeting when these zone committees were first proposed, and I wasn't the only person at the time to whom it seemed perfectly obvious that the one purpose of these zone committees was to provide a means whereby the process of forming a consensus, in quotes, was seen as a means of circumventing the Environment Court and the process of consensus forming as one in whereby agricultural interests would be, in effect, allowed to prevail through persuasion, coercion, arm twisting, or whatever, without having to go through formal legal process. And in our view, we think the whole system of zone committees needs to be reviewed in order to ascertain whether or not the system has made it possible for agricultural and commercial interests to exert a much stronger influence than arguably they should. So I think that's all I would wish to emphasise in relation to our submission.
Thanks, Peter. I've got Councillor Clearwater with a question here. Do you want to relay that to Taryn, Phil, and one from Councillor Pauling?
Yes, happy to do what works. Peter, thank you very much for your submission. What I want to ask you about, perhaps through Taryn, is you've referred to concerns about the zone committees, and you suggested in your written submission that they perhaps be reconstituted. I just wondered, especially given your considerable experience as chair of a local community group, the Residents Association and Beckenham, I just wondered if there are any sort of lessons that we might learn from community boards as to how, in fact, the work of a zone committee could be enhanced or democratised.
Peter, did you hear that?
Yeah.
You hear the question? Sorry, Councillor Clearwater, that wasn't coming through clearly. Are you able just to quickly summarise in writing so I can reread it out? It's just not coming through clearly, sorry.
I'll try and put it quickly in writing.
So perhaps, Taryn, if you just look at Councillor Pauling's question there, what would you like to see in place of zone committees?
One question for you, Peter, from Councillor Pauling is asked is, what would you like to see in place of zone committees?
We're not sure what we'd like to see, but we do think the system needs to be reviewed. We're not sure what if anything should replace it, but as I said in our submission, we think the way in which the composition and working of the zone committees needs to be reviewed. It needs to be reviewed. That's all. We're not sure what we would like to see in place.
So Taryn, Phil's question is there now.
Great. Just the next question
Are there learnings from the community board which would improve zone committees?
Pardon?
Are there learnings from community boards which should improve a zone committees?
From community boards? No, well, I'm not sure about what can be learned from the workings of community boards as far as zone committees are concerned. Sorry.
Councillor Pauling, do you want your one to be asked again? Because I suspect that's
just a supplementary question. Yeah, if you could ask that, Darren.
Councillor Pauling has asked, the government is looking at expert panels. Would that be something you would like to see, such as specialist water experts?
Such as what?
Specialist water experts.
Oh yes, very much.
Are there any more questions that councillors would like to ask of Peter? Sorry, Councillor Southworth, you've got one. So, Taryn, would you like to pass that one on, please?
Southworth, do you, Peter, think the community are familiar enough with ECAN's remnant and able to engage fully in giving direction? If not, what needs to happen?
Sorry, could you repeat that?
Sure. Do you think the community are familiar enough with ECAN's remit and able to engage fully in giving direction? And if not, what needs to happen?
Well, I think one thing that is desirable would be more more transparency in relation to in relation to certainly freshwater management, possibly more dialogue or more publicity through the website, the ECAN's website. Transparency and use of the website to solicit input on water-related matters, but also more dialogue with other territorial authorities on water-related matters. Thank you.
Thank you. Taryn, I'm not quite sure whether Peter can actually see us or hear us on screen as well, but if not, and assuming he can't, could you please thank him very, very much for taking the time and the effort to present to the council today his feedback on our annual plan submission, and we really appreciate that, and just wish him a good day. Thank you very much.
Oh, well, thank you.
Louise, I noticed that Stephen Howard's in the room for Keep Our Assets. We are running a bit early, given that we had a gap that wasn't full. Stephen,
Yes, sorry, Claire. Yes, Stephen is here. Stephen, are you happy to start now, or will somebody was going to go with you?
I was expecting John Minto to be on with me, Good afternoon, by the way.
Sorry, it wasn't John, that it was somebody else I put on the invitation list.
Wow.
Murray Horton's the name you've
Murray
got, Louise.
Horton. Murray Horton was on the...
John's been waiting for a link to be put on with you because he's got things to say about housing and transport.
Right, Stephen, if you would like to start, and I will see if I can get John into the meeting while you're going. Is that all right?
Have you
just seen your email. So I've just seen your email, so I'll email a link to
his email address. Very good.
Yes, I have. So I'll send an email to John. And in the meantime, if you'd like to start, thank you.
Good afternoon, Stephen, and thank you very much for coming in early. It's far better to be probably be running early than late, as long as that we can get the parties in the room that we need to have in the room to present to us. So we appreciate that, and it would just take a few minutes possibly to bring John to the screen as well. But if you're happy to start, we'll be happy to listen. So the floor is yours, so to speak.
Thank you very much. Tēnā koutou. John and I represent COA, which is Keep Our Assets Canterbury. We're a loose group of people and organisations opposed to the removal of commonly owned and used assets in Canterbury. Local democracy is one of the most important of these assets. We wish to greet and congratulate the new councillors and say hello to old friends. My name is Stephen Howard. John should be with me. I'll start with democracy. As we're all aware, democracy was removed from ECAN for many years, but is slowly but not perfectly being restored. The loss of democracy, loss of the important but abstract, a loss of an important but abstract asset, common to us all, was, in the opinion of many, driven by the inability to get a river's water plan over the line, which in turn was driven by the refusal of 3 councillors with vested interest in irrigation to recuse themselves from decisions where they had a vested interest. That loss of democracy reinforced the loss of access to clean water for the public, both in rivers and lakes and in our pipes too in the long run. Given that the present councillor has been elected with a huge gerrymander in favour of rural areas, we hope that a similar situation doesn't occur in this council. The principle of recusing on questions where the elected official has a vested interest is central to a decent democracy. So I hope we have good luck with that, both you and us, speaking as a voter there. In regards to democratic oversight, I'm surprised that ECAN is going ahead with the process of the annual plan and has not put it back. Hearing processes like this should be very public events, and it's hard to see how a Teams meeting like this is a public event. And also the council has very little idea of how the next year will look economically, except that we do know that tourism will shrink significantly and asset values are likely to change hugely. This makes it hard to see how residents of Canterbury can meaningfully engage with the process of setting an annual plan, annual budget. I've got more to say on water, but I was going to leave time for John to speak on those things that he's interested in. Is he on yet? Hello? Hello?
Stephen, I've sent him the invitation, but I don't think he's joined us just yet.
So just talking about water in that case, I'm very concerned with water, and I'll give you an example from a personal perspective. About 2 years ago, I received from Waimakariri District Council, in regards to the well on my block, a suggestion that we should all in the long run be forced to go into a council well because of the danger of nitrate leaching into the shallow aquifer my well runs on. That shallow aquifer I think, is replenished from the Air River, which flows intermittently, as you'll all be aware. My well goes down something like 30, 32, 33 metres. And as a number of houses in the areas built up after the earthquakes, has become patchy for a lot of people. But the important thing is that nitrate leaching. Now, speaking from an economic perspective, it's extremely inefficient from a market pricing point of view, that a cost should be imposed upon the broad number of people by the actions of those who are basically gaining a profit from pouring nitrates onto the soil to breed more, to grow more grass, to feed more cows, etc., etc. So I'm very concerned about the water situation and the cost it's imposing in the long run on society. I'm also familiar with what Dr. Mike Joyce says about our surface water, lakes and rivers. And I find it all disappointing that we haven't seen the level of enforcement to ensure that those rivers and lakes, and the testing, because there seems to be a major hole in testing, and under past councils, that we would have liked to see. The other area I have a personal interest in is air quality. We know for years that the urban areas have had severe restrictions on burning of fuels for home heating. But the ongoing burning of stubble and windbake rubbish and slash from forestry blocks continues on the plains. I notice it very much because I have asthma, and once that stubble season starts, my asthma gets much, much worse. So once again, there's a huge cost there to me personally and to anybody else in my situation by allowing the continual burning of rubbish like that. There's also, of course, a problem that in the long run, that's a carbon emissions problem, and also a soil depletions problem, because naturally that waste from those operations would end up rotting down into the land. And of course, with stubble burning and slash burning, it doesn't. So I'd very much recommend that the council pursue much stricter regulations on stubble and slash burning on the plains. Has John turned up yet?
Stephen, no.
Well, is it possible to, because I haven't prepared anything on transport and housing, which John was keen to speak on, is it possible to come back at a later time?
Yes, we could do that at the end of the hearing, which will be about 3:45.
Well, if that's all right with John, I would suggest that. But
he's here.
He's here, right.
Yeah.
Timing is everything.
Can you hear us, John? Yes, Claire Mackay here. I'm chairing this afternoon's meeting. Welcome to it. I'm sorry you've taken a little while to get in. We were running early, and so part of it is an issue on our end, but we don't often run early in these hearings. So listen, Stephen's presented what he wished to present, and he's up to the stage where I understand he would pass it over to you. Is that correct, Stephen? Yeah, so the floor is yours, John.
Oh, thank you very much. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, all good.
All right. Yeah, sorry, I 1:45, I just clicked on. I didn't realise you'd started a wee bit earlier. Well, I really wanted to talk about about free public transport, which I think is an issue which has always been one that would hugely benefit Christchurch, but it's with the post-COVID situation, I think it's even more important. So I'll just say a couple of things, and then if people have got questions, that would be very keen to answer them. there's a discussion that started about this. The Christchurch Press had a double spread last week looking at fare free public transport, and it's an idea that's being discussed right around the world, as in part in response to COVID-19, but of course it's been going on long before that. And it seems to me there are two huge issues that have bedeviled New Zealand for a long time, and that is climate change and really gross levels of inequality. And we can tackle both of those in a really significant way in Christchurch if we had fare-free public transport. So, and I think in normal situation, there'd be a very big kickback from business on something like this. Business have been pushing user pays and privatisation, selling assets and all that kind of thing. And this kind of goes in the opposite direction. But in fact, talking to business people in Christchurch, there's a lot of support for the idea, at least to give it a go, because I mean, the biggest problem they see with Christchurch is the fact that the city centre is still in a really parlous state. And overseas, where free public transport's come in, there has been a marked increase in, I guess, a revitalisation of city centres, and you can imagine that happening. So that would be, I'd really strongly encourage ECAN to put aside, to budget the money to at least run, do a feasibility study and run a trial. So I'll leave it there, and if people have got questions, that might be the best thing to. I'll throw it over to you guys. Sorry. Oh, be paid for. My Bronwyn behind me just says, "How's it going to be paid for?" Well, it doesn't cost money in rates or in transport, but what it will mean is when the transport funding comes in to the city, it is through a negotiation with the government. It's divvied up differently. So in Auckland right now, there's the transport funding is going 3-to-1 in favour of public transport. But in Christchurch, the funding's going 2-to-1 against public transport. And so I think if we had the same mix of funding that Auckland has, we could easily have free public transport and have the money to invest in, we need a low emissions fleet of buses that can, running frequently and reliably. And I think we'd see a big change in Christchurch travel patterns. Kia ora.
Thank you, John, for that. We've got a couple of questions coming up here from councillors. So the first one was from Councillor Liz McKenzie. So floor's yours, Liz.
Yeah. Hi, John and Stephen. I think this is probably a question to John. You mentioned in your written submission about the use of fixed or uniform rating units in order to make rates more equitable. Can you please give a bit more detail on how this would actually work?
Can I answer that?
Yep, sure.
Yes. When you look at the rating bill, some of the rates are charged on a proportion of the capital value or the land value of the unit being rated. Flat charges against the title mean that the poorer people and lower value properties pay just as much as the very rich people and hugely valuable properties. This is a regressive tax, and as all regressive taxes do, they tend to increase inequities in society. Further to that, in our submission, I mentioned the Vancouver tax, which would be one of the most useful things ECAN could do to close that inequity gap that we have in New Zealand, in Canterbury especially.
Okay, thank you for that. Yep.
Councillor Clearwater, you've got a question that you'd like to bring to the floor.
Thanks, Claire, and thanks, Stephen and John, for your submission. John, I was just going to ask you, you referred to a feasibility study for fare free public transport and a possibility of a trial. I just wondered if there's, with your knowledge about the bus systems in Christchurch, if there's a current bus route which in fact might be suitable to run a trial of free PT on.
Well, that's a really good question. Yeah, takes. I'd be happy to think about it and give a more considered response, but I would think somewhere. I mean, just my feeling would be maybe something from the east of Christchurch, say from New Brighton right through the city, and maybe something on the northern route from Rangiora to the city, because those are I think perhaps choosing two routes like that might be a thing to do. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, John.
I'm encouraged by your question.
Councillor Southworth, you've got a question?
Yeah, thanks for the presentations. John, you mentioned a 3-to-1 for PT and a 2-to-1 against when you were talking about how it's funded. And I just could you explain a bit more about how that works, please?
Well, I can send you the graph which has got those details on it. It's an NZTA comparison between Christchurch and Auckland. It basically works. I mean, the government allocates a transport fund to a region such as Christchurch, and then there's a negotiation between, in this case, it will be between ECAN and the government as to how that is divvied up between public transport and roading. And I think that's the negotiation point where if the city, if ECAN said, look, we really want to give this a go. We've got business behind us. We've got the community behind us. And I think with some real leadership, I don't see why that wouldn't happen, given that we've got, the biggest, the group most opposed to it would I think, be very keen to see a trial or a feasibility study. It would be negotiating with the government to say, look, this is our priority here in Christchurch, and we would like to, we'd like to swing the funding model in favour of public transport, so that the big roading projects, and I know there are MPs who've talked about, National Party MPs have talked about having a 4-lane road from Christchurch to Ashburton. I mean, I just think that's absolutely nuts. This is $40 million per kilometre. It is crazy, a crazy money spent, when it would only cost $20 million at the moment to make the buses as they are free. So, I think it's a matter of it is a negotiation with the government as things stand at the moment.
So so it's not about the total amount of spend; it's about the budget and where we allocate it.
Yeah, exactly. It's the budget will be the same, but what ECAN would say is, look, we've got this budget here. We want a much bigger chunk of it to go to public transport, and the roading projects we want them put on a longer term plan, if you know what I mean. So we prioritise the free public transport. I think from Rangiora out to Littleton and out to Darfield and and Rolleston, that sort of area. The greater Christchurch area would really benefit from it.
Great, thank you.
Do any other councillors have any questions of John and Stephen regarding their presentation to us today? There isn't anyway, so look, I just really thank you very much for joining, John. Sorry we were running early. We'd been running very late this morning, so I took the opportunity to start. You were correct, it was a 1:45 start, but we really appreciate the fact that you've come on and done your presentation around your public transport piece there, and also to Stephen, and I'm not sure whether Stephen's still in the room with us. I hope he is, but thank you both for presenting on behalf of Keep Our Assets, so very much appreciated. I do have a little request here. John, if you could forward that graph, that would be very much appreciated. that
All right,
you're
I'll-
referring to.
That's great. I'll send
Thank
it.
you. Thank you.
right.
Have a good day.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye. Louise, we're running just about 5 minutes early. I think Nikki's in the room. So
She is. Yes, Nikki
if
from
Yep.
Nikki from Forest and Bird. Yes.
Hello.
Nikki, you can hear us?
Yes, I can hear you loud and clear. Thank you, Claire.
Good. Can't actually see you, so yes, you're back now. So thank you
Yep.
very much. So
I'm
welcome
here.
to this virtual meeting. I think I just should have mentioned before that the meetings are actually being recorded, and as I understand it, Louise, correct me if I'm wrong, they are available to view on the website straight after the meetings. So yeah, and
It'll
most
be
of us will be offline at the time to try and have the best IT systems going that we've got. So yeah, floor is yours, Nikki.
Thank you very much, and I'm fine with it being recorded, so that's all good. So kia ora and greetings to old and new councillors. My name is Nikki Snowink and I'm the Regional Manager for Forest and Bird for Canterbury and the West Coast. And in Canterbury we have 4 branches and many supporters right throughout the region. And thanks very much for the opportunity to speak today, and I hope that this finds you all well in these extraordinary circumstances. My presentation relates to ECAN's 2 strategic priorities as they are set out in the long-term plan. And one of those is freshwater management, and the other one is a step change for Indigenous biodiversity and an inherent connection between these 2 things. And these are things that are really sort of core to Forest and Bird's existence too. So that's what I'm going to speak about. And I'd like to finish with a note on the Regional Council's purpose statement and the significance of this statement. I note that the annual plan process began before COVID-19 set in, and the intention is to review the activities and the costs in light of COVID-19. And right now, I believe we have a really incredible opportunity to reprioritise our actions and to get meaningful outcomes for our environment and for our nature, underpinned by ecological principles and for the 2 strategic priorities, and get Canterbury onto a truly transformative pathway in terms of the future. So Forest and Bird strongly supports the Regional Council's climate change initiative and stresses that resilience must include maintaining and restoring freshwater ecosystems and habitat for Indigenous species as well as for people. So on to the first strategic priority, and that's freshwater management. And I just want to make a quick comment about zone committees. We have for a long time maintained the need for a review of the purpose and the need for zone committees. While we acknowledge the role that the zone committees play in building relationships and essentially community capital, we stress the need for these sort of community collaborative groups to be inclusive and the need to restore relevance and trust out there in the community. And we suggest that a new purpose, if we were to look at the purpose of these zone committees, if they were going to be maintained into the future, should be more around environmental advocacy, funding for initiatives, promoting good management practice and climate change initiatives and that sort of thing out there. And this sort of the carrot function, I guess. The other thing is around the cost of the zone delivery teams. And we sort of question exactly what they are delivering and the cost of maintaining these teams all around the region, in addition to facilitating zone committees. We acknowledge their advocacy role as well, the zone team's advocacy role and the connection to the community, but we strongly suggest that we need to have a close look at how zone delivery could be delivered in a more efficient and effective way. The other thing with regards to the zone delivery teams is the compliance monitoring and enforcement function, which I understand are within these teams. We recommend that these need to be removed from the zone delivery teams, and it needs to be needs to sit outside. Having the regulatory function inside the zone delivery teams, their function is the regulatory function is essentially compromised. We think the compliance monitoring and enforcement function needs to be independent, and it needs to be strongly resourced to improve capability and capacity throughout the region. The community expects this, and as an independent, capable compliance monitoring enforcement is required, if nothing else but to reward good behaviour out there. So, you know, we think it needs to be independent, sit outside of any of the zone delivery teams and be allowed to do its carry out its function as it should. This has been a big frustration of ours and other groups similar to ours around Christchurch and Canterbury. The second strategic priority is a step change for Indigenous biodiversity. That is set out pretty clearly in the long-term plan. We are sorry to say that loss of naturally occurring Indigenous biodiversity continues to happen all around Canterbury at a rapid rate. We think the priority needs to be exactly maintaining what remains and then encouraging restoration and replanting to support that, to complement that. So halting the loss, that's what halting the loss or halting the decline means, is to maintain what remains out there. Maintaining what remains is fundamental to the RMA and to sustainable management. And so this sort of relates to my point about zone delivery up, as I mentioned before, and the need for a sweet carrot and a really good stick to back it up. So, you know, there's definitely a balance there between encouraging and taking the educational approach and also having the stick to back it up when that doesn't work. There's been quite a lot of talk about agency alignment, and this is all very well, but we think that we need to, with regard to Indigenous biodiversity, an amendment to the RPS, the Regional Policy Statement, to explicitly make Indigenous biodiversity protection and restoration everybody's responsibility, not just territorial authorities. So it's actually everyone's responsibility if we are to get that step change and achieve the strategic priority. A joined up approach with a common goal where expertise, capability and capacity is shared among agencies and groups like ours and industry organisations will be far more efficient and effective. Currently, we think that good outcomes for freshwater are constrained without protecting Indigenous biodiversity and land use activities. We think the portfolios need to be really strongly aligned as well. So the territorial function of maintaining terrestrial biodiversity and the regional council function of water management cannot operate in isolation. Biosecurity actions need to complement biodiversity as well. Sometimes I hear of, you know, things where this doesn't quite happen as good as it could. Some examples that spring to mind are Canadian geese management. I understand there's a really good initiative between ECAN, the Christchurch City Council and the Christchurch Airport to manage these creatures, which have starting to increase in numbers around Christchurch. It's a really great initiative, but I understand that it's stalled. So let's see if we can get that on the go again. The Braided Rivers Action Group is another great initiative, but its purpose seems to have been lost, and again it'll fail unless we have the key stakeholders around the table, and by that I mean the territorial authorities. They tend not to turn up at those meetings, and to me they're integral to getting an outcome, a good outcome for freshwater and for biodiversity. The new biosecurity groups that Environment Canterbury has established look really promising, but again they need a really clear purpose for the outcome and what they're seeking to achieve. And so that leads me on to my third and final point, and that's about ECAN's purpose statement. The current one, I think, is facilitating sustainable development, and to us this is really an oxymoron. You know, all that can be developed in Canterbury has been developed, and especially with respect to the two strategic priorities, the freshwater management and the Indigenous biodiversity, there's no shortage of documentation out there about the perilous state of these two things in our region. And that aside, the Resource Management Act talks about sustainable management and not development. So a purpose statement needs to really reflect the outcome that we're all seeking to achieve here. And I'm wondering if perhaps looking back to the past is a really good starting point. The statement used to be everything is connected, and I actually think that's a really cool statement. It stresses all the things that I have discussed, that we cannot separate water from land. Good outcomes for water and biodiversity require a sweet carrot and a strong independent stick. We cannot work in isolation in our silos, so we need to work much closer together between regional, council, territorial authorities, DOC, LINZ, industry groups and community environmental groups out there too, and the community as well. And I just want to say that the choices that we make now will so impact on those who come after us. So right now, this COVID-19 thing has given us this incredible opportunity to redefine the work program and to achieve truly meaningful outcomes for regional council's 2 strategic priorities. There's only 2, so it's not too tricky. Freshwater management and a step change for Indigenous biodiversity. And to breathe some life into a truly transformative economy for Canterbury that prioritises the protection of nature and its freshwater, the sort of key things that the points of difference that we have in the South Island of New Zealand. So that pretty much wraps it up. Thanks for the opportunity to speak, and kia ora.
Thank you very much, Nikki. A very enthusiastic presentation. Particularly, you just get the feel of how proud you are to be in Canterbury and want to see it improve, as a lot of the rest of us that sit around the council table do. So I'm just waiting to see. Yes, we've got Councillor Farm. You would like to ask a question of Nikki?
Thanks, Claire. Nikki, can you hear me?
I can. Kia ora, Lan. How you doing?
Lovely. Kia ora, Nikki. Yeah, no, really good. Thanks. Thanks so much for your submission. I mean, as always, it's really good to have that really strong and clear feedback about a number of aspects of ECAN's work and where we could improve. My question was referring to your written submission, where Forest and Bird came out with some rather strong statements around our non-statutory braided river management plans. And I guess I just wanted to test on that because, I mean, I totally understand the gist of what you're saying, that the statutory from Forest and Bird's point of view is absolutely what matters. But I guess just reflecting on your comments before about the carrot and the stick, do you think there's room for both, you know, strongly addressing, for example, the Dewhurst braided river issue in a statutory way, but also having these sort of more visionary community plans for our braided rivers? And if you had any thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, I agree, and they were quite strong statements. But given that we have not particularly strong statutory sort of framework around some of our braided rivers, and I'm thinking about our bigger braided rivers, some of them like the Rangitata, that I feel as though having some good statutory provisions would be a good direction. Of course, we need that educational and voluntary approach as well, but we've got the zone committees and the zone delivery teams that do all that work, so I really don't see the need for non-statutory plans in the absence of good statutory plans. I mean, it's limited resources, isn't there, for planning and that sort of stuff, so we need to target them and spend it the most efficient and effective way we can. And non-statutory plans are not enforceable, so there's no sort of ability to, you know, enforce it. Simple as that, really. Whereas a good, strong statutory plan that's clear sends a much clearer signal to people about what is and isn't acceptable in the future.
Noted. Thank you, Nikki.
Oh, sorry, Lan. So we have a question from Councillor Pauling, Southworth, and then Hands. If we go in that order, that'll be much appreciated. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. Kia ora, Nikki. Thanks so much for your presentation and the work of Forest and Bird putting this together. I just had a question, and I like your thoughts on you know, looking at the purpose of zone committees and maybe reviewing that. And you may have just answered the question about, you know, a good, strong statutory plan versus a non-statutory plan. But I just wanted a bit more of an example around what you thought might be a more efficient and effective role for zone delivery and maybe zone committees.
Well, I guess, you know, we've got zone committees all around the countryside, and we also have zone delivery, and the zone delivery teams, so it's a question of cost really, and limited resources to get the outcomes that we want. And I know that the Canterbury Water Management Strategy, or water management's a significant chunk of ECAN's budget, and I feel like some of it, you know, for what? What are we actually achieving? Because I do wonder about the direction of water management, and if it's actually setting out to achieve what you know, is it achieving what it set out to achieve? That really needs a good strong look. In terms of zone committees, I know that they have done a really awesome job in some people's eyes of building community capital and establishing relationships out there, but there's also a large sector of the community that has been excluded from them, and Forest and Bird would be, you know, in that camp, I suppose. So I feel like there is a need to review the need for and the purpose, and what would they look like if we do keep them. And actually they need to be catchment based as well. At the moment, I look at the way the zone committee areas are broken up, and they don't actually relate to the actual catchment of a river. And I mean, we don't even have a zone committee for the upper reaches of our big rivers like the Rangitata and the Rakaia and the Waimakariri. Those sort of high country areas are what is where our remaining Indigenous biodiversity exists. It's good stuff up there, and that is where we're losing stuff hand over fist. So, you know, I think we do need to review the physical locations of these entities and how they reflect a proper catchment, so that we have a kia ora kitai approach from the mountains to the sea, and we look at holistic management of the rivers. I don't think they do that at the moment.
Thanks, Nikki. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Craig.
Councillor Southworth.
Yeah, and sorry if you caught, I had a child come in the middle, which I might have missed something, but I was wondering if you had anything to comment on in terms of the coastal component of our annual plan, and you know, how you feel about the coastal environment and how that fits in with the big picture.
I do, Vicky. Thank you for bringing that to my attention. I didn't include it in here because I thought I was limited to 10 minutes. But yeah, certainly the coastal area is part of that kia ora kitai approach from the mountains to the sea. I am really worried about the coastal environment, that our Canterbury Coastal Plan is way out of date. And in terms of, we need to you know, think about some sort of management of the ocean just as much as we do think about management of the land. So you guys have a responsibility out to the 12-mile limit, and you know, that seems to me at the moment it could be up for grabs, and it's really frightening. So I'd love to see a review of the Canterbury Coastal Plan that you know, brings it into line with the New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement and really protects that habitat out there for our native species. And you know, climate change as well, that comes into it too. How can we strengthen that part of the country to give us the resilience we need from effects of climate change?
Thank you, Nikki. We'll go to Councillor Edge and then Councillor Mackenzie to close off the questions.
Thanks, Nikki. Just talking about the zone committee process, do you think that we're sort of moving now from the zone committee focus that was originally on addressing sort of statutory consenting sort of issues to a new phase of delivering on the ground actions? And if that's the new way of looking at those zone committees, do you think that we need to focus a little bit more on subcatchment management planning, and to make sure that communities and landowners and things are part of that mix, as well as agencies like yourself?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I think the trust and relevance of the word zone committee out there is really concerning out there in the community. I think they'll have to come back with a new name. And I do think there is a role for these sort of collaborative groups out there in the community in environmental advocacy and funding of different projects, and identifying, helping to identify significant natural areas and protecting. And you know, I'm thinking about the the draft NPS for Indigenous biodiversity and what that means for us in the future. So I definitely think there is a role for some sort of catchment group, but it needs to have that big holistic overview.
Thanks, Nikki. The other question I had is a little bit related to that and some of your other comments. In 2008, Canterbury Regional Council produced a Canterbury Biodiversity Strategy. And part of that had a whole lot of sets of goals and actions, and part of that was interagency cooperation, all those sorts of things. And obviously through the earthquake process and all sorts of things, that sort of got set to one side. Do you think it's worthwhile thinking about that document, reviewing it, and bringing it into you know, a new era, if you like? Is that a useful way forward, do you think?
Absolutely. Bring it out from the bottom shelf and get the dust off it and have a good look at it, because it is actually quite a good document. But the thing is, that's not statutory, that document. So, I mean, that's why it's been put on the back burner. But yes, I definitely think it should be brought back out into the open and put on the tables of the signatories, so that they can see that they have actually done this before, and it saves reinventing the wheel. Good point, Councillor Edge.
Okay, great, thanks.
Councillor Mackenzie.
Hi, Nikki. Yeah, my question is in relation to something in your submission. You mentioned landscape scale protection.
Yeah.
So at the moment, I'm not certain that Environment Canterbury has the sufficient legal sort of foundation to afford landscape scale protection. My question to you would be, what sort of single bit of legislation would be worth targeting or area in order to affect our ability or afford our ability to protect at this level?
In terms of legislation that you guys administer or have to work under?
Or can pressure government on?
Oh, probably the Wildlife Act for a starter, in terms of native species. We're all kind of thinking about that. But the Biosecurity Act is a really good one. I guess from landscape scale protection, it sort of relates to what Councillor Edge said before, with all the signatories on that regional, the biodiversity strategy for Canterbury, is that it's everybody working together and get everybody working together for the same purpose. So there's we've got these really good little new biodiversity working groups, or biodiversity biosecurity working groups that ECAN has established, and I think that is a good mechanism. But in terms of legislation, Wildlife Act, Biosecurity Act, Resource Management Act, yeah. Pest management, that landscape scale stuff is about pest management. So joining up the dots between the agencies and the other interested stakeholders to ensure that we get the best bang for buck for pest control right across the landscape to protect biodiversity. And I guess that's the Biosecurity Act.
Okay. And that would sort of come under regional leadership.
Yeah, yep, regional leadership, okay. Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah, okay, great, thank you.
Cool. I think you're on the right track with the biosecurity advisory groups that you've established. We just need to know what the purpose is, a clear purpose, and that comes back to your overarching, your purpose statement, where if we go in there and instead of facilitating sustainable development, I mean, how does that actually relate to doing landscape scale pest control? It doesn't, but everything is connected does, because we all, have to work for a common purpose.
Thank you, Nikki. Look, I really do appreciate the time and effort that you've taken with providing this feedback to us. And one thing I really appreciate is the fact that while you may not be happy with everything or our shortcomings, you've taken the time to provide some suggestions, and I think that's really appreciated by my fellow councillors. But look, thank you very much for joining us in this virtual meeting. And it's gone pretty well, actually, from my end. So I'm hoping everybody else has been able to hear loud and clear. But thank you very, very much, and I wish you a good day.
Thank you very much, and kia ora everybody, and go well, stay well out there. Kia ora.
Thank you. Claire, it's Louise. We've got Shona now from the Woody and Sefton Community Board. I think Shona's with us.
Yep.
Yes. Ready to go?
That'll be great. Thank you. You there, Shona?
Yes, I am. You're ready to go?
Yep.
Good afternoon, and thank you, of course, for the opportunity to present today. Unique circumstances, of course, which is always challenging, so we'll see how it goes. I have the privilege of chairing the Woody and Sefton Community Board, which represents and advocates for communities like Woody End Beach, Pegasus, Waikoku Beach, and Sefton in North Canterbury. It's a fast-growing area with many new subdivisions and new communities. So this rapid growth does, of course, present many challenges, but also opportunities. We do recognise that this is a challenging time for Environment Canterbury, but do urge a rethink on the level of rate increase proposed, as it is an extremely challenging time for residents and businesses. Overall, the board do support the Waimakariri District Council's submission on the draft annual plan, and we are aware of their concerns and the recommendations that they made earlier today. Our board would actually like to provide some specific feedback on the high proposed overall increase, and the increase in particular to the passenger transport targeted rate for Waimakariri urban ratepayers. To say that we were stunned at the proposed increase in rates for our area would be an understatement. Blindsided might actually be the better description, and I'll explain why shortly. In the sample increase that was given, Rangiora Urban, the increase was over 21%, Kaiapoi Urban was over 24% in the rates overall. Those were increases of like $67 and $74. So in the information that the council have set out on rates, on setting rates, there is that statement. We have a policy limit on rates increases of 5.3%, and council works hard to keep it below that, or must be satisfied that the exceedance is justifiable. We cannot see how that proposed increase is justifiable even before the economic implications of COVID-19. So a large chunk of that increase is for that targeted transport rate, with a proposed increase of just under $57 for urban properties. So here's some background for all the councillors. In May and August last year, a review of the Waimakariri bus service was held. During that consultation, we were told that any changes had to stay within the current budget. We had to make some major compromises to achieve that, which we still will believe will impact on that usefulness and the patronage on that service when it is introduced. So in December, there was consultation which closed for a new Waimakariri commuter bus service, which would provide express services at peak hours using park and ride facilities. Now, the board has supported that concept, but we were very concerned about affordability with the maximum increase stated of $30 in rates. This was well documented during that consultation. Then on the 20th of January, the report came out from that consultation with the decision that there would be 4 trips into the CBD and 5 trips out in the afternoon, and again included the maximum of $30 as the rate increase. So yes, we were blindsided when on the 24th of February, just over a month later, the draft annual plan came out with the proposed increase being 90% higher at just under $57. So somewhere there seems to have been a disconnect, because it went from a maximum of $30, which was consulted on in December, the decision being made in January, reinforcing that, and then just a month later, with the draft annual plan, the $30 maximum increase becomes just under $57. And as I said, that's a 90% increase. So like you, I'm sure that we're pretty unsure about what the effect, the environment, the economic impact will be of the lockdown and COVID-19, and also that changes in how people will work and maybe travel to and from work, or whether they'll work more from home. So we would like to see ECAN hit the pause button and then do a reset. There is this window of opportunity with the further delay in the Northern Corridor. It's been caused by the lockdown. To get the best result for our communities and to maximise patronage, we would like to see you continuing to work with the Waimakariri District Council to find that best way forward. A further round of consultation could well be needed because it could involve some changes. That division of cost between the council also needs to be assessed and reviewed completely. It's worth noting that from the consultation, only 51% supported the $30 increase for the commuter bus service. 14% supported a lower cost option with fewer trips, and that was at $22. 35% didn't support either option. Those figures tell a story about the feeling in the community on the increase. The proposed rate increase was a central issue with many of the commenters during that consultation. We believe if the consultation had been done with the $57 figure, the results would have been negative toward the service because of the cost. The residents on low and fixed incomes have strongly signalled they would find it extremely difficult to continue to afford the rates, either through direct rates or rent increases. If this increase went through, the rise faced by urban ratepayers in the Waimakariri for the passenger transport rate is a staggering 169% in a 3-year period. I would like to add that we do value the relationship that we have built between ourselves and the community engagement team at the council over the last year through the various consultations on the bus services. So it's not all negative. It is a good relationship we have developed there. There is another area that the board would like to comment on, which wasn't included in our submission, but we have since included it in our submission to the Waimakariri District Council on their draft annual plan. And as it involves ECAN, we see this as an opportunity to speak to you about it. So the Wood End Pegasus Waikuku area, it's a wonderfully ecologically diverse area with many significant waterways, and we value the work that has been done with these. However, there is one waterway which is often overlooked, but it is a huge recreational asset for the Greater Christchurch area, and that is Pegasus Lake. This is well used, but also has the potential to be even better. It's used for triathlons, dragon boat racing and training, trailer sailors, kayakers, paddleboarders, dogs, and the Pegasus Radio Sailing Club. And this club was actually going to host the Oceania Championships later this year, until something happened. But the Pegasus Lake is actually regarded as a premier venue for this group, right across New Zealand and now also in Australia. But the lake has been badly neglected, and we would like Environment Canterbury to work together with the Waimakariri District Council and the new owners of the lake, the Templeton Group, to come up with a plan for clearing the weed from the lake and developing solutions for the toxic algae that has plagued the lake each summer. The community would like to know what the plan is, along with the timeframes, and see some accountability to ensure the plan is actually carried out. And so thank you once again for the opportunity to comment, and I welcome any questions.
Thank you, Shona, very much for that very strong presentation on behalf of the Wood End Sefton Community Board. You can be assured that the public transport and the cost to the Waimakariri ratepayers is still a work in progress, with staff looking at it, and certainly as a part of the annual plan there's been no decisions. So take on board all your concerns, and certainly they were presented by Mayor Gordon this morning on behalf of the Waimak District Council. So we have a couple of questions here, Councillor Clearwater and then Councillor Pauling, and followed by Councillor Edge. Phil?
Thanks for your talking with us, Shona. My question really is around the link between transport, public transport, and emissions, carbon emissions, and climate change. So I just wondered what your community board sort of approach to improving, developing a climate change plan, so that in fact we reduce emissions. I just wonder where you'd come as a board come to on that.
And we certainly try to encourage the use of public transport, but it has been difficult. You know, nothing against Environment Canterbury, but it has been very, very difficult. We were promised a review of bus services a number of years ago. Didn't happen. We kept asking. We were asking for a direct service between Woodend and Pegasus and Rangiora, because that Rangiora is seen as our main service town. Had been in place years previously, but straight after the earthquakes, it really wasn't feasible. And then when Environment Canterbury came to us with the first round of consultation in May last year, that wasn't on there. There was 2 buses literally going on the same route between here and Silverstream and one into town, and it seemed, excuse me, are you not listening to us?
I understand that, and thank you for explaining it. What do you think, in fact, the board would like to see those express bus services that you've referred to? Would you like to see those in place?
We certainly did support that in the consultation. Our concern was certainly around the cost. You know, we had concerns with the Waimakariri Council and the park and ride locations, and that they weren't particularly suitable for our area. And that, of course, it will be a future thing with perhaps bringing a park and ride up here, because we also felt that Hiranui people would also use a park and ride facility based around Woodend somewhere.
Yeah, thanks, Shona. Look, I do understand about your concerns about the process. In terms of the figure of $57, I would still ask you that, in fact, or point out to you that, in fact, that's about the less than the price of a cup of coffee each week. So I just wonder what your view about the actual cost is. I understand about your concerns about the process and the percentage increases.
Well, in my written submission, I actually addressed that, and I actually said, yeah, you know, $1.10 a week seems nothing. But to me, that is a very simplistic way of looking at things, because it's $1 a week here for this, it's $5 a week there for that. And so you cannot look at it as a cup of coffee. I'm sorry about that, but you cannot look at it like that. It is increase upon increase upon increase. The consultation revolved around $30 a week. That was what was consulted on. That was what 51% said yes, and the other half said no, not at that level. So yeah, I'm sorry, I cannot look at it in those simplistic terms of it is only $1.10 a week.
Thanks, Shona.
But in terms of climate change, yes, our board is very concerned about that. We have Woodend here, which we have major traffic problems through, with you know, battling NZTA to try and actually get a bypass, and in the meantime to actually get some safety improvements. We have 20,000 vehicles a day going through Woodend. So yes, climate change and trying to get people onto public transport and using other methods, but you know, 11% of the traffic is trucks. So
indeed, yeah. Thank you, Shona. That helps me understand where your board is coming from. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Councillor Pauling.
Kia ora, Claire. Thank you, Shona, for your presentation. I just picked up at the end on your comments about Lake Pegasus. It's a place that I've used a lot for wakaama. We hold our championships there, so I understand that's an important place for sporting and recreational pursuits. I just wanted to ask if you, as the community board, had started anything along the lines of what you suggested in terms of a work program or strategy around cleaning up the lake. If you've started anything in conjunction with Templeton and WDC that we could link into?
Yeah, Templeton Group only took over earlier this year, and I'm not even 100% sure yet, but you know, even before lockdown, the lake had not actually vested across to Templeton Group. So that, you know, there was a time delay there, but certainly I had a meeting with the mayor who was having a meeting with Templeton Group, and we went through the Pegasus Lake and the issues around that. So yes, there had been a plan apparently with the previous owners, with Todd Property, but no action was ever taken. So there has actually been quite a lot of work, I understand, between ECAN and there was some with Todd Property and also the Waimea Area Council is in there. So, and yeah, we sort of act as well as giving advice about how it is actually used and the condition of the lake. So yes, there has been some work done.
Cool. I mean, it'd be great to maybe hear some more about that, and we can ask internally to get some more information and maybe come back to you and WDC as well. Thank you.
That would be great.
Councillor Edge.
Hi, Shona. My thoughts are also related to Pegasus Lake. And the issue really is about the vesting issue of the lake itself as part of the consenting process. Last time I broached the subject with the council, my understanding was that their hands were a little bit tied in terms of what they could do there because it was effectively in private ownership until it's vested. The other issue is that the consent, unfortunately, was never for the water quality that was envisaged in some of the earlier visioning information. And so that really poses an issue too in terms of the water quality for certain recreational types. But I suppose it's an issue that you guys are going to keep your eye open onto. And yeah, I think maybe further down the track that if he can assist in some way. But I think to my mind, it's probably an issue for the district council in the first instance between them and the property owner. Is that your reading of it?
No, it is actually a three-way group that should be involved. ECAN has had involvement and should continue to have involvement. I mean, the list of sports I read out did not actually include primary contact with the lake. It was all around secondary contact. I think locals have come to that conclusion that swimming, may not be on the cards there, and we are fortunate and we have Pegasus Beach just down the road, so we do have an alternative, but they certainly do like their dogs to be able to go and have a swim there, and we certainly want it to be safe for the waka ama and the dragon boaters, where they are splashing water around, the kayakers and the novice sailors who have been known to fall in, and the paddle boarders. So I do think it is actually a three-way. There needs to be an approach with all three groups involved, and that's what we haven't had in the past.
Thank you, Shona. We'll have one last question from Councillor Southworth.
There you go. Hi, thanks, Shona. I would like to go back to asking a question about the public transport service. And if I've understood, there was consultation on the idea of an express service, but not on looking at the network that provided for your more local community and Rangiora that you see as your service town. And I wonder, do you have a sense of what the outcome might have been in terms of how the local community prioritise those two things, the service to the city and the service to your most local town? And as an outsider, so I'm both from the UK and also now a resident in Christchurch, I have to say the only place I've seen traffic that comes close to what I saw in the UK is heading north out of Christchurch in the morning, and so for me that, as an outsider, that looks like a very, very significant issue to address, and that's where the public transport can provide some relief and congestion reduction in time sat in congestion, but perhaps that's we've sort of making an assumption around what is actually your priority, so you perhaps talk to that, please.
Yeah, I probably didn't make it clear, but the consultation we had coming up to a year ago was around that whole Waimakariri bus service, and that was where we talked about that we wanted a service between Woody and Pegasus and the Rangiora. So that was agreed. There has been routes put in place and everything like that. It was due to start in December last year, then it got deferred until April, May this year. So unsure where it actually is now. In that list, the last contact I had, I asked just before we went into lockdown, I actually asked, and there was no further updates on when that would be introduced. We said it as being quite important. We need the service into Christchurch and return. but we need that service to Rangiora. The way it stands at the moment, for me to get, I live here in Pegasus, for me to get to Rangiora to go to, say, a council meeting, it's just on an hour and a half if I take public transport. For something I could actually walk in that time, because I have to go through Kaiapoi, change buses, and the buses don't connect in Kaiapoi. So having that direct service to Rangiora was seen as extremely important. But the express service is also seen as important because there is that whole climate change impact, congestion, and we recognise that congestion through St Albans, which is bad. We do recognise that there is congestion there. We do get a little tired of being, hard to account for all of it, and it's those Waimakariri residents, and it's terrible. I could just as easily say that the Christchurch residents travelling north for their weekends away creates a heck of a problem for us in Woody End, and when they travel back on Sunday afternoon. So there was two ways of looking at it. So hopefully that's answered your question.
No, that's helpful, thank you. And I think perhaps we could follow up on where the deferral on that Rangiora service is at and find out what's happening with that. That's lovely, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shona. Look, it's obvious how dear this is to you. So no, we've heard your concerns around the public transport and the concerns of the Lake Pegasus from the Woody and Sefton Community Board perspective. So look, I really appreciate that you've taken the time to come on to this virtual meeting, and the technology's worked for us fine today. So look, wish you well and have a good afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mackay. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks. Right, Louise, I see I'm pretty sure we've got Oscar, Ruby and Jasmine in the room for the Youth Ropu. Are you folk online? Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you. Yes, we're here.
Oh, great. That's good. I'm not sure whether your video, I've got my video going. Most of the councillors all have their videos off to try and make sure that we have good, clear connections. So welcome to this afternoon's hearing session. And yeah, I'll hand it over to you guys. So who's going to kick off?
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jasmine, and with me this afternoon is Oscar, our chair, and Ruby, our deputy chair. We are from the Environment Canterbury Youth Ropu, and we have an identical structure to council with the addition of 2 mana whenua representatives. The way that we've written our feedback has been to answer the questions posed throughout the draft annual plan, as well as provide a couple of important general recommendations. This feedback has been approved by all 16 of our reps as well, so that was pretty awesome to get done. This afternoon, we're going to speak about 2 key messages within our feedback to council. Firstly, collaboration to enhance environmental outcomes, and finally, youth representation. I'll now hand over to Ruby.
Kia ora koutou. In the Youth Ropu's response to the questions on the draft annual plan, a common theme of collaboration with and for the environment can be observed. In answering these questions, we talked about a wide range of issues and topics, from freshwater and braided rivers to food resilience and climate change, and how vital it is that we nurture and facilitate regeneration of pre-existing ecosystems and use all of the tools we have to improve responses to climate change and food insecurity. We as the Youth Ropu have shown in our feedback that we believe in order to preserve the wonderful aspects of our region, we must work together with Runanga, Youth, Mana Whenua, Niwa and Department of Conservation in order to facilitate the best possible outcomes for the environment here in Canterbury, and so therefore the people within it. We as Youth Ropu stated that we're in full support of the water zone committees, as we think they empower the community and give them ownership of their problems surrounding fresh water. This is a great example of collaboration being used to create better environmental outcomes. We also support an increase in collaboration between Niwa, Department of Conservation and other water zone committees to share ideas and utilise all resources available. We also believe that incorporating more Māori values into monitoring systems will have a great impact on the outcomes of the water zone committees. Using Mahinga Kai as an example, monitoring such can help to track the overall health of water systems instead of just one aspect, all while helping to preserve a unique and crucial part of our environment and culture. In response to the question about freshwater issues, we said that in our communities we can see, among other things, an increase in algal bloom levels, an increase in nitrate and phosphate levels, and current damage being done to marine environments. We stated that we believe biological concerns should be given as much weight as concerns around human use when talking about these big issues. We also believe in making sure native species, such as tuna, that are greatly affected by what we do with the water, are looked after by maintaining the health of our waterways. In response to the question, what bothers you most about climate change, the youth rōwhā argue that we are not simply bothered by the effects climate change will have on us, instead we are frightened by them. We are frightened of the economic, social, cultural and environmental consequences that come with climate disruption. As youth, we will experience these effects of climate change for the rest of our lives, and so we believe that all measures should be taken in order to minimise the impacts as much as possible. As shown in the map of the effects of sea level rise across New Zealand, places like Kaiapoi, New Brighton and Aranui, to name a few of many, will be greatly impacted by rising annual flood lines and sea levels. This shows the severity of this issue and why it is more than something that is bothering us. When talking about Canterbury feeding itself in the event of a disaster, we emphasise that community and food resilience is imperative moving forward. As we move into incredibly unpredictable times, climate change will bring not only a threat to food security, but also to the biodiversity of this earth of which our existence is interwoven with. So, in order to ensure that Canterbury can thrive in these conditions, we need to do all we can to protect diversity in our food production and distribution, in our region and in our environment, in order to create a food resilient system and community, a resilient food system, and community. As I just said, we believe that by increasing the health and biodiversity of the environment in which we live here in Canterbury, everyone will benefit. We also believe that through collaboration, the progress and outcomes of our work can be greatly enhanced, and so therefore will enhance the health of the region's people and the environment as a whole. I'll now pass to Oscar.
Thanks, Ruby. That's cool. So today I'm talking about the other main point from our feedback, and that's about just general youth participation and where we see in the annual plan feedback and the questions we answered, where we see that can add lots of value. So first of all, in our general recommendations, we noticed that the word participation has been swapped for engagement. When we think of engagement, we think it's kind of talking, it's quite simple, it's simply kind of having a conversation or doing something to not a massive extent. We think participation is different. We think participation is stuff more like what we're doing now. We think it's having active hui's, and we think it's actively listening and allowing young people to participate. So that's one thing that we have said we would like to see different. We also, I'll direct you to our response detailing our community response about climate change, because this is very focused on youth participation on page 6 of our feedback. We think that being a youth council, which ranges from ages at the moment 16 to 24, and ranging the whole entire of Canterbury, which is very rare for a youth council. We're pretty much the only youth council in Canterbury that has a model like this. We are in a really unique position to facilitate the kind of participation and engagement we think is needed to tackle climate change and this big issue in terms of a community response. We've got 4 main points on that: action with youth, action groups within local communities, action in wider areas, and action for by Māori. Now, action with youth and action for by Māori are our 2 kind of main ones here. Action with youth. This looks like engaging with the very people that have pushed so hard for much of the change that other submitters and we have talked about and we are going to talk about today. As Ruby said, we are frightened by climate change. It's something that we know that we're going to have to try and figure out how to deal with in the future. And we think that action with youth and actively engaging these people on the issue that's going to affect them the most in their lives in the future is of extreme importance. And I'm going to talk a bit later on like in terms of actual evidence why this is so relevant. In action for by Māori, Māori know this land in such different ways to many Pakeha do things like mahinga kai. We've got lots of different value systems, and especially with our two mana whenua representatives on the Ikan Youth Ropu, we believe that there is immense space for added value and added insight to do with climate change from engagement for Māori by Māori. We think New Zealand is in a unique position to engage with Indigenous peoples, unlike many other countries we've had the option of doing. Then we've got, so that's basically our stuff with that first section about community response to climate change. So basically we think if this is done, if we do community participation well, youth participation well, you're bringing people with you. The long-term goals and the long-term game that you are engaging with now as councillors, because after all, ECAN is very long-term focused, means that you're going to have a strong mandate for the future to do stuff to actually affect people's lives in the future. What you're doing now will not just be changed, repealed, altered in the future. You're going to create a strong bond with the community. So this kind of section of the feedback motions you to evaluate youth engagement and community outreach. Then I'm going to move on to water zone committees and where we think focus should be put. We've clearly said in our feedback that we think water zone committees are awesome. We're in full support of them. We think they empower communities to make their own decisions. They bring people in. They're amazing platforms for stakeholder engagement, and they can incorporate many cultural practices we're seeing in Christchurch, West Melton. So we believe that, as I said, they're a great place for engagement, and we think youth have a massive, relevant part that they can play on these water zone committees. The Ikan Youth Ropu has been participating in a plan with council, with staff, and a few council members as well, on how we can get youth representatives across water zone committees in Canterbury. There is immense interest in this idea. A lot of people see the value in it, staff see the value in it, and we're really excited to see where this is going. As the Canterbury Water Management Strategy says about zone committees, it says zone committees give consideration to and balance the interests of all water stakeholders in the region in debate and decision making. This quote itself is a clear mandate that youth who are going to be the ones implementing and tackling the decisions that these zone committees make can add immense value to how they work. We also think community engagement is one thing that previously some generations have struggled with more than others. We think that youth and young people today have a really good tap on how we can actually make that community engagement work at its best and how we can get ECAN's work out the most. And we think there's a really clear space for an unclouded, totally different, shooting straight view that we believe youth members will bring, and we think that more youth participation with water zone committees is a great way to strengthen them further than we already believe they are. So lastly, I'm just going to touch on some evidence that we've put throughout our feedback. First of all, we've noted the 42 rights of the child. So these have been ratified by the New Zealand government, and Article 12 says the child has the right to express his or her opinion freely and to have that opinion taken into account in any matter or procedure affecting the child. Around a third of our members are under the age of 18. That includes myself and Ruby, who has presented today. We cannot vote. We think that these rights of the child are some of the only legislation that actually protects us and having our voices heard. And we think it gives a direct mandate to council like yourselves and to councils around New Zealand to actually have to engage with youth and to do the job that this the 42 rights lay out. So we think that the crux of all of our feedback has been obviously about environmental concerns and youth participation. And I'll give you just a quick kind of roundup of that youth participation aspect to finish up with. So we think democracy does not serve those under 18 directly. Engagement, HUIs, participation, what we're doing now is the only way for those under 18 to actually physically engage. That does not mean that council and other groups don't have to engage back. As I've just said with the 42 rights of the child, as well as being democratically elected members, you're still obligated to be consulting with all members of a population. So we think that in terms of, we've also mentioned stuff to do with voter turnout. We think getting people young, engaging and hearing them, making them value what ECAN and other places is doing, strengthens your place as an institution. It will get higher voter turnout, more recognition, and overall, we will have a stronger democracy because we are engaging people young and making them believe in the institutions that are designed to serve them that they're paying money to. We think this feedback shows that young people want to be involved. And we also like to say that we don't know how we are to expect young people to suddenly get out and vote at 18 when they haven't previously been engaged with. And we motion in this feedback for continued enhancement of engagement procedures to take place. So we'd like to thank you for listening to our feedback. I think I went a bit overtime there. Sorry, I forgot to put my timer on. And we'd love to hear some questions. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jasmine, Ruby, and Oscar. I mean, I certainly thought you had a very thorough and thoughtful written submission, and that's just been followed up by a very strong verbal presentation there. So we do have some questions. I'm not going to decide who they'll be directed at. The speaker can identify that person. So, Councillor Southworth, Vicky, you have a question.
I do, and I think probably this is to Oscar. This is the thing you were just talking about. So when we look at the statistics after, from voting, often younger people are not very well represented in the proportion of the electorate. So even once you gain the right to vote, often youth aren't. And I wonder, what support do you need? Obviously, you're very passionate about this. What support do you need, or what actions do you think Environment Canterbury should take to enable younger people to know what we're doing, why it's important for them to vote, and provide support them with the knowledge to be able to make a good choice around their voting, rather than how do you approach that, and what should we do?
I think that this feedback overall speaks to not only annual goals but long-term goals, and voting for us is definitely a long-term goal. We think that there's definitely not it's not a 5-year fix. It's probably not even like a 6-7 year fix. It's something that we believe, for one, having an ECAN Youth Rōpū, we are now directly able to run events to reach out, to engage people from all over Canterbury. We're going through processes of engaging with all the youth councils in Canterbury. So there's a lot of engagement going on from our side to promote ECAN's work and to promote ECAN events and different things. We've had youth meetups. There's really a consistent effort by us to be promoting the work that we are doing to benefit this place. And we are also working on social media with the Environment Canterbury pages to be promoting relevant stuff. We think that voting, as you said, the issue is we can't suddenly expect people to vote on the date, straight away after they turn 18 if they've never been engaged with previously. Our feedback motions for climate change, for example, for a bottom-up approach and a top-down approach. So that top-down approach looks like, council having a concerted effort to really, I can't think of specifics right now, to engage people, but the bottom-up approach is something that we can help with more, which is getting that groundswell and that word of mouth and engaging a few people who will engage a few more people, who will engage a few more people, and running events and getting people on zone committees and taking the small steps that we believe will make institutionalized change and increase that voter turnout. Because I think the biggest problem right now, as you said, is people, one, don't know what ECAN really is or does, and two, a lot of young people in democracy don't feel like elected representatives are doing what they need or are mandating them to do anyway, so they don't vote. And we think that through the work that we're spending a lot of time on doing, 155 hours last month doing, that's going to hopefully begin to change. Yeah, if that answers your question.
Okay, and if I could just quickly, as another one, which is that anecdotally anyway, a lot of younger people who are on the buses in the city, so this is city relevant really, who are on the buses as younger students, switch to the car when they become old enough to drive. And I just wonder again, is there enough education and understanding across the group to connect the idea of what their actions are and then how they can influence and reduce their carbon footprint, which, as you said, climate change is something very frightening to you, but the actions of many youth is not reflecting that. And so again, what do we need to do to address that issue?
Yeah, so I'm the central representative on the Youth Rōpū, so I can speak to this quite well. We did send through a public transport statement from the Youth Rōpū in response to the last meeting we had with council. I'm not sure if all or many of the councillors have seen this. It's quite extensive and pretty much everything with public transport. On that though, specifically, there was a push and a concerted idea from most of the group. I can't say all of the group because I'm not 100% sure that's the case, that they thought the lack of a student fee, a difference between a child and adult fee, was a really big put off. And ultimately, we are all conscious of climate change. We all do want to make a difference. But when the price goes up quite a lot, and when the prices continue to rise, when we're trying to promote people go on buses, when there's no air conditioning on many buses, and when Wi-Fi and other things aren't offered on those places, the incentive to tackle climate change and to tackle big issues versus cost and benefit is something that I think most youth have a big issue coming to terms with and dealing with, and it's something that we'd like to look into more.
It's lovely. Thank you very much, Oscar. That's really great. Thanks.
So, Councillor Farm, and then we'll finish off with a question from Councillor Clearwater. Thank you.
Thanks, Claire, and thanks to the Rōpū. Yeah, you guys do fantastic work, and thanks for just taking this all so seriously and bringing so much energy and really good ideas to the table. My question was, you know, the whole gist of your submission is really about building resilience and future-proofing this region. And I just wanted to pick up on, because this is really relevant for council discussion at the moment, your comments around our purpose statement. You'd like to see us ideally strive to serve several generations into the future. And, you know, I mean, purpose statements are kind of things that, you know, it's sort of nice to say. But I guess I'd just like, I don't know, thoughts from either Ruby or Jasmine about how much it means to the Rōpū that we actually get this right, and then our purpose statement, if we can land something that really has that future focus, that it actually translates into the work we do. And do you have any comments about that?
Jasmine, do that one or Ruby?
Yeah, I can speak to this. Councillor Farm, I personally think that, along with our other Youth Rōpū members, that providing ways to show that our community or our Canterbury region has resilience and can provide future-proofing solutions is so important to our futures as youth. If we don't see that in your purpose statement, reflected in your purpose statement, then how, you know, I guess it's kind of a question of what are our expectations of you and what are your expectations of us, and then how do we meet in the middle to reflect both parties.
Cool, thank you, Jasmine.
Councillor Clearwater, you've got a question?
Oh, thanks, Claire. And thank you to the Rōpū from me too, and all of us. Look, I just want to ask if any of you have got thoughts around the whole issue of democracy, which Oscar's referred to. So, like, you'll be aware that in terms of the other zone committee members, although you don't unfortunately get a vote, they are appointed or selected. They're not. It's not a democratic process that they arrive as zone committee members either. So, given though that those members have special, certainly specialist knowledge around the various catchments, that's very helpful. But I just wondered if you would see a way for zone committees to be able to all together work towards becoming more democratic in the future in terms of the selection process. If you've got any comments about that.
I know I've been working quite hard on a project which I can probably comment on to make this a bit clearer from our perspective. Right now, obviously, it's probably slightly unrealistic to say let's open zone committees up to like a community board style where everyone's democratically elected on. But in terms of democracy, we think having a representation of voices, ages, this is actually personally my perspective, genders, everything, will lead those to be inherently more democratic because you'd hope that that's representing a more broad range of voices. With that also comes down to yeah, it's a hard question and it's a long-term kind of discussion to have. And I think that we acknowledge that we think zone committees are a great thing, and we acknowledge what other people say though as well about ways that they might change, ways that their things might change. What we've motioned to in our feedback is pretty much that we love how they do stakeholder engagement, we love all the community outreach, and we love the connection that it brings, and that's where we see most value in zone committees. And with democracy, because of the previous issues that they've tackled in terms of zone implementation plans have been so, I guess, based on science and specific knowledge and experience with these areas, then the necessity to have those types of people that are appointed based on their knowledge to streamline that process was probably more necessary in the past than it is now, when the zips aren't being drafted really anywhere anymore. Yeah.
Thanks, Oscar.
Thanks, guys. Look, I really, really appreciate the fact that Oscar and Jasmine and Ruby, that you've all taken the time to come in and connect with us for this virtual meeting. Look, keep up the good work and we will see you around, I'm sure. But look, really do appreciate the fact that you've provided the feedback today. So thank you very much on behalf of the other councillors. Have a good day.
Thank you for
Thank
having
you.
us.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Jane, I'm not sure.
Sorry, that's Chris next. Sorry to interrupt, Claire. Sorry, hi Jane. We're running a wee bit late. We need Chris Horner's next, and then Jane.
Okay, so I will disappear and come back.
You're welcome to stay and listen.
I've got limited internet. Thanks.
Right. Okay. Give us 10, 15 minutes.
Okay.
We'll go for 10. We'll be. And I say time to get in. Thanks, Jane. Chris, are you still with us?
Just before Jane goes, I'm not sure. I haven't seen Chris come up on my side.
She was quite a wee bit earlier.
Don't run away yet, Jane.
No.
Okay.
Yeah, she was on there, Louise. I saw her. Yeah, she was. Yes. Chris, you may still be on. You may be on mute. I'll text her. Thank you. I'll just push another button.
She's not actually showing up as being active.
Well, Jane, if you're happy to go now, and we'll perhaps just reverse the order for these two ones and make sure that we've got Chris up and running. Is that all right, everybody?
Yeah, fine by me.
Okay,
yeah, welcome,
thank you, Jane.
Welcome, Jane. Yeah, you're sitting there, so stay connected, and if you'd like to do your presentation, that will be great. Thank you very much.
Thanks for that. Kia ora tātou. Thanks for the opportunity to present. Times have changed, and here we are presenting on an annual plan in a wildly different world. Our COVID environment probably means we have a changed priority and a changed focus of efforts, or we should have. I think COVID accentuates the need to do and to live differently. So the first question becomes, is the proposed rate increase still appropriate, or are there opportunities for trimming the dollars? And you'll see I made a submission fairly high level. I'll reiterate it. I think our three priorities are freshwater, freshwater, and freshwater. So in tandem with that, we need to be looking at the monitoring situation. I'll just give you an example of my frustration. My awa is the Huranui, and so between the Huranui and the Waihao Ufa, we have a smaller catchment of about, I think it's about 12,000 hectares called the Jed. Now, probably getting on for 10 years ago, the community did a year of monitoring and was told that a snapshot of monitoring is just a point in time and not useful nor helpful. And this we found out the hard way when it came to developing the original Hiranui Waiau plan. And then after many years in 2018, they started monitoring again. Yay, we went. So we all assumed we were going to have 3 years of monitoring data for the upcoming plan review in 2022. What do you know? It was only 1 year of data. So here again, we have a snapshot only, no 3 years of data for any trend. So how can that be useful in working towards a plan? So I would urge you to work with your CEO and look at some of these opportunities to sort of improve some of the monitoring routines so that they are not in silo, because if you've got planners out there working towards 2022 and plan changes, we need 3 years of data. So that's my local little beef about monitoring and my little Turanga Waiwai. So in conjunction with that, you'll see that I've endorsed the additional funding for biodiversity. You know, it's sort of often overlooked. It involves soil regeneration, understanding the nitrogen cycle. We've got water filtering, we've got storm buffering, and all these things are sort of invisible services. And if we don't keep the natural world healthy, we won't, or the environment healthy, we won't have an economy. I think it's becoming more and more apparent that the one is dependent on the other. I was looking at the Merrill Forum Wellbeing Overview to see what they had to say about things as they are looking to update some documents. And even they say a key challenge, or their report, the Wellbeing report says a key challenge is the ongoing loss of habitats that support indigenous flora and fauna, especially in lowland and montane parts of the region. And I note that it appears that a lot of the biodiversity work, or a significant chunk of biodiversity work, is around restorative work, which I assume involves a lot of riparian planting and the like. And while that has its value, limited in some areas, but beneficial in terms of biodiversity, it's not nearly as valuable as protecting the integrity of existing remnants. And I look at your own ECAN lands, currently leased, so part of the remnant of lowland savanna that you've got out in West Melton. Are we doing enough with that? Are we doing enough with the river terraces? When you look at Tiparita and the possibilities there, one of the last, well, it was a couple of years ago, I don't know if there's anything left or if development's encroached further on it. But protecting those remnant patches is far more important than starting again with replanting, because you don't reestablish the microflora, the fungi, the bacteria overnight. It takes hundreds of years. So for me, I'd sooner see you move some more dollars to protection and take care of some of these existing remnants. I mentioned also media. I think perhaps, I don't know, I look on your website for articles from time to time, and where's the articles about the benefits of regenerative agriculture, or on reduced stocking rates and resulting productivity and profitability? Sorry, I'll try that again. The resulting productivity and profitability. I couldn't find anything on the website. We've got a significant portion of our community disengaged, and so we shouldn't, well, we could take a message from Einstein, I guess, and that is, don't keep doing the same thing again and again and expect different results. So I think, you know, getting really, really creative to further engage young people and looking at what we do. You know, that fabulous A2 paper publication that goes out. Do we really need to do that? How many people read it? Is there another way of delivering to our younger people through electronic media? Work with our kids, etc. So you have my written submission, but I guess at this point, my request would be that you review your proposals for efficiency and effectiveness and adjust the plan accordingly. And I'll give you one more example. The proposed hui for water zone committees, that was to be a 2-day affair with dinner, accommodation. And when I saw that, it just raised the question in my mind of how much money was to be spent on that. It had somebody taken the time to work out what all the associated expenses would be, and is that money better spent on protecting biodiversity, changing our use of media, and doing a whole lot more water monitoring so that we're better prepared for plan changes? So that's me. I welcome your questions and thank you.
Thank you, Jane, for that very passionate presentation. Some pleas in there, but also some good suggestions that for the council to take on board. And several of them, particularly around the communications, we have established a working group to look at some of that stuff, which I think is what you've actually been seeking. So we've got some questions coming up here on the chat page. So Councillor Southworth, and then a question from Councillor Edge. So Vicky.
Hi, thank you. Kia ora, Jane. Yeah, 2 questions from me. One is, you mentioned about the importance of protecting remnants and prioritising what we've already got and protecting that. What do you think needs to happen to make that happen? What's the critical thing?
Well, for me, the first place to start, and this is just my opinion, you've got staff who know a whole lot more about the status of lands, but I look at the land that LINZ manages, primarily on a lot of it in our riverbeds. And if we want to tie in with our CWMS priority areas, I see that braided river projects are being focused on, which is great. I mean, there must be some remnant patches that we could work with adjacent landowners and actually protect them beforehand. I mean, I also mentioned the West Melton Savannah lands, but I think your biodiversity, your ecology staff have got a pretty good handle on where remnant patches are. And if we go back to the original Canterbury biodiversity strategy of 2000 and I don't know, 8, 9, somewhere back there, a lot of that information was already identified. It was kept private because of the wishes of landowners, and that's fair enough. But there are people out there who know these things.
Great, thanks for that. And then I also wanted to then raise a question that was in your submission, where you talk about rates going from fire security, which is obviously a really important part of conservation as well, but moving from targeted rates to general rates, and you comment on that. Could you explain what the importance is of between the difference and of those two things?
I have to say that the annual plan is not a very user-friendly document to read, in that there are some high-level statements that don't necessarily give me enough specifics to work where changes are. I couldn't find anything in the plan, and I didn't read it stem to stern, but I moved through a few chunks, and I didn't find anything that said we're having an increase of X dollars here and a decrease of other dollars. I know you have overall portfolio moves that show the change from the LTP and last year's expenditure, but it seems that a lot of our landowner biosecurity functions were funded by landowners, and my suspicion is that that may have moved to be funded by the general ratepayer. More so, that's relating to the biosecurity aspect more so than the biodiversity aspect. I don't know. I can't really put my finger on the specifics. I noticed when you look at the change in targeted rates versus general rates, there is some movement there and movement against the LTP. I don't know. But I couldn't give you a specific, but I do think that there needs to be, I mean, 60-something% of your rates come from the city. And biosecurity is a very expensive little project that primarily benefits the landowner. And I personally feel that the landowner should be paying a portion of that. It's already got some general rate component. So if that's changed, that doesn't sit that well with me, but maybe there's more to it than I know.
Jane, Lan's just going to email you some background information from that, which will help you understand some of that information a bit better between general and targeted.
Thanks.
Do you have another one, Vicky?
No, sorry, that was me done. Thanks very much. Thanks, Jane.
Okay, then we had a question from Councillor Reg.
Hi, Jane. Just a couple of thoughts. In terms of this protection of biodiversity, in the proposed National Policy Statement for Indigenous Biodiversity, the SCNA work, I think I'm right, is proposed to be undertaken by the territorial authorities. Do you have confidence in that they could undertake that work, or do you think it might be better handled regionally through the Environment Canterbury?
Ooh, there's a loaded question. I mean, land is the jurisdiction of the territorials rather than the regional. But our CWMS is supported by both entities and others. And I think it's about utilizing the water management strategy to raise the profile, the importance, to support the territorial in upping the game, I guess is one way of putting it. Sometimes it's not easy because there's often a lot of landowner pushback, and I think it's really critical that we don't forget the why component when we're having those discussions. But I think the vehicle could be the water management strategy and utilizing that a whole lot more, because it is a joint delivery tool.
Yep. Secondly, do you still think, given where we are in the scheme of things, do you still think that the Hiranui zipper process for 2022, is that still a relevant process? Or I suppose I'm thinking of it's a planning tool, lots of planning's taken place. Would it be better that finances involved with that are put into, say, delivery on the ground and those things that you're talking about, protection and control of biosecurity issues, those sorts of things? Is that, or do you think we should still run with the zipper?
Well, I think almost I find that sort of dealing with apples and oranges, comparing apples and oranges a little bit. I think the plan is essential, and I think it needs to be updated to be in line with central government direction. Just the fact that it isn't even totally enacted in the Hiranui Waiau zone just sets my hair on fire. This is a plan that became operative in 2014. But only because of that plan have we seen Amuri Irrigation negotiate some transfer of nitrogen permits, I'll call them, to enable dryland farmers to have a little more leeway. Now, if we didn't have a plan that specified a nitrogen limit, we would never have had that negotiation between the various parties. So for me, the plan as a backstop is essential. But I think sometimes that the CWMS as a whole could be thoroughly investigated by an independent person, and I'm not sure I consider Henley Associates independent because they were largely instrumental in shepherding the development of this project. I'd like to see it go out to a completely independent party. Probably a bit more work for whoever that is, but I think again that delivery and that effectiveness needs to be thoroughly scoped, because here we are 10 years on. And when we look at the reports that have been put out on the status, leaves things wanting in many directions. And then if you look at the list of want-to-do projects on the Fit for Future, there's an awful lot of projects there. So I don't know if I've actually answered your question, but because you're looking for me to say, where can we take money from in order to provide money for this alternate? And I would say, look at the CWMS, which seems to be a hell of a lot of hooey and not a lot of doey, and see if we can trim some money there in terms of delivery.
Thanks, Jane. You did really answer my question from your conversation. Really, it's both aspects, some legal statutory mechanisms, and zone committee on the ground delivery sort of stuff as well.
Yeah, I just wonder with the whole CWMS process if we've become an animal, and I'm part of it because I'm on the regional committee. And I look at what we achieved last year, and I really shake my head about the cost that it took to get us to continue with our meeting and what we actually delivered. And I also sit in on the Haranui Waia Ufa meetings, not all of them, but a good number of them. And I ask the same question of myself. This is a very expensive process, and what are we delivering?
Thank you, Jane. Look, I just am conscious that we're getting well over time again now. But look, I really do appreciate you taking the time to come and present to us this afternoon, and our virtual meeting has worked very well, I think. So look, yeah, really appreciate the fact that you've presented to us and provided the written feedback as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Claire,
Chris.
It's Louise, sorry. Yes, Chris is back, and I think the mute problem has been solved.
Hope so. Can you hear me?
Oh, yes, you can. Chris. Thanks, Chris. Cool. Lovely.
Welcome to the meeting, Chris.
Thank you. I've been here for a while, just sitting quietly listening. It's been fascinating.
Oh, well, hope we haven't wasted too much of your day. But look, no, right. We are having these, this is our last session on our hearings of the feedback. So yes, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Look, my apologies for the submission that I put in. It was appalling, but you know, I just needed to get something in. So I guess I'm speaking today what I should have written then. I guess my background is that I'm a social scientist, and I really think that ECAN is not making enough use of our community infrastructure, of the kinds of things that perhaps social science could bring, or some aspects of that. So I'm echoing a little bit of what the youth Ropu guys said. I think, you know, you could actually achieve a lot more by tapping into some of the things that are going on around the city. To begin, the other thing I'm going to do is I overall support this plan, but I also see that there's a need for things to change with the next LTP. So I'm just kind of raising some of those things. Sustainable development is the vision. I don't like. There hasn't been any sustainability if we're to judge by the condition of our resources and what's happened to them over the last couple of decades. So I'd like to see a lot more sustainable and a lot less development, at least a lot more focus on sustainable. Council shouldn't be should be looking after our resources because nobody else is doing that. So we need that to happen. And I think if the council's not doing it, then nobody else will be doing it either. And so, you know, thinking about some of the things like what Kate Raworth has come up with in her donut economics model would be really useful. Public transport, I actually feel like there's a need to work with different communities, and I mean that in quite a fine-grained way. So I work a lot with communities right around the city, and I'm aware that they're all very different and that they actually have really different public transport needs. And it would be good to be working in the same kind of way you're working with zone committees, to be working with different communities on what would work for them, because I think you could get better uptake and you could get by more people, and it's not a one size fits all. So just raising that flag and suggesting that, you know, it's really good to see you doing things like the on-demand services in Timaru. Well, there are communities here that could really benefit from it too. And it would be good to be thinking about that. And getting more heads involved in the problem. So working with communities, not on them, would be particularly good. And I also think there'd be some benefits in actually doing a little bit of work around why people are not using public transport as we would hope they would, and why they're not using it as much as people in other cities. Biodiversity, I'm just going to echo what pretty much I've heard everybody saying today, which is look after what we already have as a priority. I'm all for restoration of waterways and using biodiversity and helping to look after water, and but I also think, gosh, you know, don't allow what's already there to be developed or to disappear. If they're important, those patches. Water, again, I'm hearing myself kind of echo what I've already heard, but I think there is probably reason to do a review of zone committees and how they're working. I like what I've seen of zone committees in a lot of cases, but you know, the nitrate issue in Christchurch Water is one place where I don't think they've worked, and they haven't worked because, you know, there's zone committees that don't work on a catchment basis. So there's a whole bunch of stakeholders that weren't involved in the development of that plan by the Waimak Zone Committee because they didn't see Christchurch people as their stakeholders. But and that's a problem with the way the Zone Committee is set up. I think there are questions sort of around the function of zone committees now that implementation is the focus, and it's not so much about developing zippers and things like that. As a thing for the coming plan, I'd really like to see us focus on getting non-copper brake pads mandated, you know, as a thing that needs to happen in New Zealand. And so I'd like to see ECAN, I see a role for them in initiating discussions and with both government and local communities. I'd also really like to see us testing our water for pesticides and weedicides. And again, this is something for the long-term plan next year. If we're not looking for it, we're not going to see it. And I think there's enough questions raised about that for us to be taking some stance on it. Around climate change, I really support the youth rōpū. How can you work with communities on this topic, and how can you work in a way that I would call transcontextual? You know, climate change affects everything, and all the things that the regional council does are affected by climate change and also affect climate change. So how can you start to work with that? How can you work with our communities and the groups that exist, because there's quite a lot of organisation around this too. So, you know, making use of community infrastructure that is already in existence, it saves a lot of work and also helps you get somewhere. I would comment also the increased soil carbon, and we're seeing quite a bit come across, I'm seeing quite a bit come across my desk at the moment on regenerative farming and some of the work that's going on there. And I have farming friends who are talking about it. I'm concerned that soil carbon is something that we should be starting to measure and have it as part of the emissions trading potentially. So I'd really like it as a way of encouraging more of this kind of thing. So I'd really like to see something like that starting to come in a bit more, especially in the next LTP. I think those are the main things I want to say. Any questions?
Thank you, Chris. We have got a couple of questions coming up here. So Councillor Clearwater, and then a question from Councillor Farm. So Phil, far away.
Thank you for talking with us, Chris. It's really good to hear you again. Chris, a couple of questions for you. One was you indicated that perhaps ECAN, we're not making enough use of our community infrastructure. And I just wondered, where I'm coming from is we're a small council per head of population. And just, are you really indicating that perhaps it would be good if we looked at changing the way we engagement approach, or the way that we as a whole council, including organisation, perhaps work with these different community groups, because there's not a huge number of us? That's my first question.
That's right, and I think some of that we're seeing bits of it with staff. So we've had staff come to our community markets to talk to people there about the bus plan that came out, the public transport plan that came out last year or the year before. But there's a whole bunch of things. I know I talked to Councillor Southworth and suggested she's writing some articles that she's putting out in her local community, and I was like, well, we can put those out in our community as well. So there's a lot of Facebook groups around Christchurch. There's a lot of community newsletters. There's a lot of local newspapers that are looking for stuff, for articles, and I think they're all places that you can be putting out information, asking for information. There are a whole bunch of ways, and how we've just all had a crash course in Zoom and Teams and all the rest of it. How can we use some of those things to engage our communities more?
Okay.
I just really feel that the youth roper are right, that we need more heads, more heads from different contexts working on some of these problems, because they're wicked, they're difficult, they're complex. And we're not going to, none of us have got the answers. It's how we get the answers together that's important.
Thanks, Chris. That's very helpful. I've got a second question, if I may, because you referred to about zone committees, and I think you commented that it might be useful if they were kind of like set up differently. And I just wondered if you've got any suggestions about how they might be set up differently.
No, not off
That's
the top
all right.
of my head.
We can talk again.
Yeah. I'd be really interested to look at that, but I'd like to be, again, I think it's something, that I don't have the answers, but I actually figure it would be very good to be sitting around with a bunch of people to try and create the answers. And I mean, people who are on zone committees already, and it's people who are looking in, and community groups who are sort of not, sometimes they haven't worked well in terms of getting the word out to their communities about what's going on. I have some examples in the back of my mind, but some discussion, because I think in essence they're a really good idea. I really love the idea of bringing, some of the problems down to the community level, because that's where the rubber hits the road. And so actually those discussions are really important. It's just, how do we have them more usefully? How do we, how can we make sure that the return on that is really beneficial?
Thank you, Chris.
Lan?
Thanks, Claire, and thanks for your your verbal submission, Chris. That's been really great to hear. I guess my question is really just a continuation of the discussion you've just had with Phil, really. And I mean, I'm interested from a social science perspective. Like, we have a lot of issues at the moment that appear to be, with our limited resources, kind of framed as community processes or statutory versus non-statutory processes. And, it's like we totally recognise the importance of these community processes, but then at the same time, we're kind of asked by the community to also be like, well, if you're not putting it in law, then what's the point? I don't know. I guess I'm more alluding to our issues around braided rivers or biodiversity protection. But do you have general comments about where you would like to see our focus, statutory or non-statutory?
I think they're really both important, but I probably differ from people like Nikki Snoying, for example. In as much as when I was at Landcare Research, I did a lot of work around how communities engage with their natural resources, and it's really clear that you can't put a law in place, you can't have legal stuff going on unless you've actually got a lot of people who largely support it, because you can't, there's not the money to kind of force people to do stuff that they don't want to do and that they don't believe in. So I guess we've got to kind of start where people are and help bring people into a place where they can see why at least things are going on, and also the reasons for the legal processes or the legal plans. At the same time, when I watched Hiranui go through when they created their ZIP and then they went through the process of getting it into a statutory plan, I found that really fascinating, because there's a lot of tension in that and a lot to learn in that process. And ECAN's done quite a lot since then to bring all those other plans into some kind of statutory process. So both are important, I think, and they probably both have different purposes, and it might be about thinking about what those purposes are and asking questions around, so how do we make that a more efficient, process, set of processes together.
Cool, thank you, Chris.
We have another question from Councillor Southworth. Vicky, would you like to go?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Chris, for that. I thought, well, I've got a social scientist that I can ask about this. So you've talked about the zone committees, and I know that the zone committee and the whole CWMS, the sort of Eleanor Ostrom idea of managing resources as communities is really fundamental to the thinking. And I'm just wondering, I was quite sort of staggered when I looked. So I'm on the Selwyn Waihora Zone Committee, and it's an enormous area. And I just wonder, do you think that a model, just how engaged, albeit they're contained within the bounds of 2 braided rivers or however they're structured, they are covering these really enormous areas. And is there a need to try and address the smaller community scale to really create this connectivity and this connection to the land in which you're making a difference? Or how does that work?
Yeah, I think that's probably fair, that engaging at more small scale would be a good thing, particularly in the case of Selwyn, which is so enormous. Eleanor Ostrom, when she talked about the way communities manage commons or common resources, she actually also talked about clear boundaries, and then the need for sanctions and things like that. So it's not about not having legal processes and sanctions and all the rest of it, but it is also about having all those people contributing into what's okay and what's not. And I think having things on a catchment basis means that it's fine-grained enough often to be able to see what's actually going on, and to see what's going on a little bit more quickly as well. So that process of trying something, monitoring what happens, thinking about how to get better results, sort of round and round and round is quite an important one, and one that needs to be done at reasonably small scale. Doing things at really big scale is a lot harder. It doesn't mean it's impossible, but again, it needs thought and some discussion with those communities, and because they'll also need to work together. If you're thinking about Te Waihora, there's a lot that comes into that, and so having some kind of focus on that allows communities to understand what it is they're aiming at is also quite helpful, I think.
Okay, that's lovely. Thanks, Chris. Thanks for that.
Chair Huey, do you have a comment here?
Oh, thank you, Claire. Good afternoon, Chris. Lovely to see you
Claire.
online. I'll turn my camera on so you can actually see that I'm for real. It's really me. It is all very strange, isn't it? I was just going to follow up with your comment about Eleanor Ostrom, and of course her research was really totally based on the natural resource going in one end and coming out the other end in the same condition, which is pretty questionable with some of what we're doing, I think. So that's just my comment. Have you got a comment about that?
No, but you're right.
Okay, thanks.
Oh, well, if there aren't any more questions by fellow councillors here regarding your feedback, Chris, I really do thank you for taking the time to provide that feedback, and then also coming on this afternoon in a virtual situation, because as you alluded to at the start, this was something that we weren't looking the situation that we were going to be in when we sent out our plan for engagement, but I think we've actually managed very well. So thank you very much for participating in it, and yes, I just wish you a good day.
Yeah,
thank
and
you.
thank you guys for the opportunity.
Kia ora, Chris. Thank you.
Bye.
Okay, folks, I understand Tyrone is trying to log in at the moment, so we might just take a couple of minutes and wait until he comes online, since we're fitting him in, and he will be the last person. Annette Hamlet, that was scheduled, is going to provide some written feedback.
Thanks, Claire. It's Louise. Tyrone is in. I'm just trying to work out how to let him in. So I think the problem might be mine at the moment. So Tyrone has dialed in. But normally I get a little message when somebody comes in so I can let them in, but I haven't got that message. So just bear with me. I'll just keep pushing buttons until something happens.
I'm going to have to plug myself in before my power runs out.
Cecilia just raised a potential issue that maybe he's gone to the morning session and he's like in the room but no one's there. But then Taryn, do you mean you've checked and he's not there either?
No, I'll check the morning session now. I've just checked through our log and I can't see him waiting in the wings at all. So I'll log out, check the morning session, and I'll come back. But if you proceed with the next person, it's probably the best idea.
He's going to be the last one, Taryn, according to me.
Kia ora, Claire. It's Craig here. Just wanted to say thanks. You're doing an awesome job chairing this session, so thank you.
Don't know about this, sitting here for, what is it, 3 hours? Thank you, Craig. And when we're finished, I will ask you if you would like to close off the day's events. So you just stand by if you may.
Right, halfway.
Claire, if I could just take the opportunity during the lull, I've just, Chair Huey has asked for some more detail to be posted out to or emailed out to you all. I've just sent an email with all the financial details associated with the annual plan down to project level. So you've got portfolio, program and project level. If you've got any questions about any of the aspects of the financial aspects of the annual plan, just please give us a call. I'll put it in the email. Happy to answer any questions at any time.
Thank you, Miles. That's great.
Just confirming he's not on the morning session as well.
Oh, Claire, it's Jenny here. Sorry to interrupt. Has somebody rung him up? Sorry, Jenny, I've been emailing him. I'm multitasking here. And he has just replied to the afternoon invitation. So I'm quietly confident that any moment he'll be with us. Oh, you're doing a fantastic job. Sorry, Claire. No, I'm not actually. But I agree with your comment about sitting here for this length of time. You've done fantastic. So thanks very much.
Sharing via video link is definitely not easy with all these people coming and going and trying to get the technology working. You've done awesome, Claire. It was bloody hard this morning.
It's so good.
I'm writing down notes and words and things that make sure that I remember to say at the end of the day or after they've spoken.
I'm so glad we shared it around.
Well, I'm pleased that actually the connections worked quite well for me, so it's been quite smooth, really.
Yeah, it's gone much better this afternoon. It's great. Thanks to Louise and Tyrone for all their support. But alas, I can't. Tyrone has done the right thing. He is in the afternoon session. So, and he's here. He is. Oh. Takes a second sometimes. Tyrone, can you hear us?
I can hear you.
Oh, thank goodness, and welcome. I'm sorry it's been a bit of a mission.
Kia ora.
We're so pleased to hear you.
I was clicking on the link.
I know, look, no, I blame me rather than your good self, so thank you so much. I'll put Councillor Claire Mackay is hearing this afternoon, and I'll hand you over to Claire. Thank you.
Kia ora, Tyrone. Thank you for being persistent and coming back to us after you've been trying this morning.
Oh, pleasure, a pleasure.
Yeah, you're a visual, so we can actually see you as well. I think we've still got the majority of our councillors and some staff still in this virtual room. So look, I'll hand over to you to do your presentation of your feedback to our annual plan document. The floor is yours.
Is my 10 minutes started?
Yeah, you just go when you're ready.
Right, okay. Thanks very much. So tēnā koutou katoa, te autau pātiki te moka, ko whakarao po te moana, ko Tyrone Fields, tōku ingoa, tēnā koutou katoa. So thank you, and tēnā koe, Madam Chair, for giving me the opportunity to speak today. I'll really only be speaking only to the part of the plan that deals with transport and urban development, and actually quite narrowly, and in particular just the section on public transport. So I'm just going to make some general comments about the overall vision, and then some specific points regarding public transport as it relates to beautiful Littleton and its surrounding areas. Littleton being, of course, the port of the city of Christchurch, which you will all know, and the premier port of the South Island. Look, I'll round it up with a challenge for you all, but more of that later. So just in the beginning, so look, in the nicest possible way, I find the aspiration for public transport in the plan a little bit underwhelming. Look, ECAN can change the future, and it should really start here. I'm a middle-aged, middle-class professional father of two. I bike everywhere. I have one car. I care about the next generation, and I want this plan for public transport to speak to me in my ilk, I suppose, for want of a better term, of how we can make the world better for our children. Look, I know it's only the annual plan and not the LTP, but it's the first annual plan under full democracy, for the first time in longer than my daughter's been alive, actually, more than 12 years. So it's a chance to make a statement and be bold and put people at the centre. And every plan, regardless of the scope, is an opportunity, I think, to signpost the future. And look, I've got a pretty good sense of direction, But if this plan was the signpost, I'd be lost. I mean, are we making the network faster? Are we making it more comfortable? Are we making it fit for wireless connectivity? You know, only one of those things is really implied through the regional public transport plan. And look, but I really want to sort of hear those things described explicitly through our planning. I want to see our communities confronted with a great value proposition for Christchurch public transport. You know, like there are lots of words in the plan like deliver and delivery and delivered, but I didn't see anything in the plan to deliver apart from some hopeful targets around usage and the hope that customers will be satisfied. Satisfaction, is that our aspiration? In the entire draft annual plan, the word rail features once, and I think that we can do better. You know, and the impact of COVID-19 has created an opportunity for immediate funding for large-scale infrastructure projects. It's time to be creative. Again, I know it's only an annual plan, but you know, some sort of vision, some sort of visionary sort of sense to it would be great. You know, through a global lockdown, we've seen skies become clearer, our airs become fresher. Things that were really only a pipe dream for us have come to fruition in no time at all. You know, and how sad if from that dream we should just sleepwalk our way back into a nightmare of gridlock and gases. You know, so that's just my general comments at a high level. But with regard to provision for services specifically for Littleton, look, Littleton's a place of great importance to me. I was raised there from day one, and I've been lucky enough to represent the local community board there, though I stress I'm here in a private capacity today. But this plan and the targets in it make me feel very worried about the future of public transport for Littleton. There are some key things I feel like I need to point out about Littleton, although they should be fairly obvious to everyone. Littleton is separated from the rest of Christchurch. There's a big hill in the way, or a big series of hills. So it's quite isolated. It gets a lot of visitors, way more visitors than there are people living there, and there isn't a lot of room and not a hell of a lot of parking. And public transport there has really, it's been death by 1,000 cuts, you know, to a point where residents without alternative options are effectively cut off. You know, what's the future of the 28 service? The 535 was scrapped a couple of years ago for underperforming, and the 155 sort of replaced it. But for how long? I don't have a sense that there's anything concrete that you know that I can tell, that I could talk to the residents of Littleton about. But like, what prompted me to write a submission was after reading some comments from Councillor Southworth in the March edition of the Littleton Review. Now, Councillor Southworth made some very encouraging comments about the tantalising prospect of buses connecting Sumner and Littleton, which sat very nicely with my dream, creating possibly probably the world's greatest public bus route. You know, I mean, Sumner to Littleton in the bays. I mean, it doesn't get any better. Let's call it the 28A. You know, a route that not only embraced Whakaraupo or Littleton Harbour, but connected the communities at the perimeter of the city, and perhaps even linked in a very practical stop of Eastgate Mall along the way, because many ratepayers in Littleton, particularly the elderly ones, Eastgate's the only place where they can access key services. You know, it's vital to people like Robin Dodds, who's a Littleton resident. She can only get there by bus. Now, I thought of her when I read that article, and I said to myself, yep, this is the stuff. This is what I want to hear. But then after being so excited, I was pretty gutted to read the councillors' following comments that said, if there is sufficient community demand for this to be sustainable, I'd happily take this up and champion it. You know, I always feel like comments about demand kind of miss the point. Demand relies on an appealing value proposition, and if a great value proposition is created, the demand will follow, because in a market situation, things that are terrible are not meant to last, because why would there be demand for something terrible? But our public transport to Littleton is terrible, and it's terrible for Littleton. And what is demand anyway? Littleton's got a population of 3,000. It will never generate raw demand the way the market wants it. not with the current sort of thinking anyway. Look, does Robin Dodds equal demand? But Littleton's critical to Canterbury. The people of Canterbury want what Littleton gives them, but Littleton also needs something from the people of Canterbury. Littleton needs its region to provide that value proposition. And Councillor Southworth signed off with, please put your thoughts into feedback on this year's draft annual plan. And so I did. And this is me here giving you feedback, because most crucially, and here's the challenge, the plan talks of the need for funding from central government to attain its aspirations. And I've described them as underwhelming, but aspirations, they remain. But will that require this council to challenge the public transport operating model, the PTOM? And if it does, can our communities have confidence that you will do it? Because the time seems right and the stars are aligned. And, so please help us create a public transport system that the city and the region and Robin Dodds can be proud of. Kia ora. That's me.
Thank you very much, Tyrone, for that, and a very passionate presentation on public transport and also of the values of it to your little town of Littleton. So I'm sure we're going to have some questions here, and we do have some. Vicky says, great to hear your feedback from the article she wrote.
Thanks for inviting it.
There's some questions here from Chair Huey and then one from Councillor Clearwater.
Cool.
Jenny?
Good afternoon, Tyrone. Thank you very much for coming in, and it's fantastic that Vicky wrote the article and that got you motivated, so that's even better story. Thank you for telling us about it.
Madam Chair.
Yeah, it's great. I'm just wondering, what would be the one thing that you would like to see us do immediately about the public transport?
To challenge the PTOM, to start thinking, how can we do this differently? Because that's at the root of everything, I think. And once we can start, once the underlying model is fit for purpose, I think that other things will follow.
And have you got any comments about how we might collaborate with the community board?
Look, great question. Am I allowed to comment? I'm here as a private citizen.
Yeah, you can comment.
I just think engage. We haven't had, the board hasn't had any engagement with equine councillors thus far. Look, I know it's early days and it takes time, but look, we really would invite the Southern Region councillors at a minimum to come and talk to us. We've got a lot of ideas. We're very passionate about local public transport for our people in Banks Peninsula, and it's just got to start somewhere. It's relationships, whakawhanaungatanga.
Oh, that's really good. So I am starting to go around some of the boards, and I know some other councillors are. So looking forward to coming to see you, and I think it's a great way for us to work together. So thanks.
Thank you.
Councillor Clearwater.
Thanks very much, Tyrone, and thank you for the challenges too. I agree with you, and you made the point that the transport parts or the PT part's underwhelming. And like I know in the regional public transport plan, is to increase the patronage by 5% in 10 years. So take your point. In fact, we should be aiming higher. And with that in mind, though, Tyrone, I just wondered if you knew that, in fact, during the lockdown, a group of councillors are really looking at what kind of shovel-ready projects we can put up to central government, including public transport stuff. And we would like to talk with, for example, Mike Davidson, the chair of the Transport Committee of Council. And I'm just wondering if there might also be scope in those discussions to have them with some of you fellas on the community boards.
Yeah, and thanks for your question, Phil. And look, yes, I was aware of the shovel-ready kind of stuff. And look, our board has commented and made some suggestions to our City Councillor Andrew Turner around that sort of stuff. I think that I mean, it's always going to come down to sort of time frames, and everyone's going to want to, you know, a million ideas to try and condense into a limited pot. But look, we've given some feedback. I think that we'd love to be able to give, you know, have every opportunity to give more feedback on what could go once we understand better what can and can't be funded through the shovel ready kind of program. But you know, I guess my comments about, you know, now is the time, the stars are aligning, really spoke to that as well. So I think that again, like I reiterate, this is a really unique opportunity to try and fast track some of the stuff that really we'd been looking to do over a much longer period of time, and try and do some of these things rapidly.
Thank you, Tyrone. And I've got a specific question too. Last time I was taking the Diamond Harbour ferry from Littleton, I did notice that the ferry stop, if you like, and shelter was no great shakes. I'm just wondering if, in fact, that part of the infrastructure has been yet able to be upgraded by City Council.
On which side, Phil?
Well, both sides probably. I remember
Right,
the Diamond
so-
Harbour side was it was not in good shape at all. But the shelter part at Littleton was pretty unsavoury in the weather.
Yeah, no, fair enough. And look, because one side of it's is council owned on the Diamond Harbour side, so the Diamond Harbour Wharf is in line for an upgrade. So that's part of, you know, that's very much something that's happening sooner rather than later. On the Littleton side, it's really around the timeframes for LPC to change the docking station for the ferry. I understand it's moving around to Dampier Bay. We don't have, the board has actually asked for timeframes on when that's going to happen, because I can appreciate it's pretty rickety where it is at the moment. But that really, I guess that requires some engagement with LPC as well, Phil. And and I don't think it's very clear as to when those kinds of things are going to happen. But you know, it would be nice to try and expedite some of those conversations.
Hope it's timely. Thank you, Tyrone.
Thanks, Councillor Clearwater. Always lovely to hear from you.
Likewise.
Thanks, Phil. We have one last question from Councillor Southworth. Vicky.
So kia ora, Tyrone, and yeah, thank you for picking up on my challenge and putting in submissions. And I have to say my proposition of a bus that goes from Sumner to Littleton is quite selfishly motivated as well, in that there's great pubs in Littleton and I'd love to come over from Sumner over the hill on the bus and home. I have used the bus from Sumner. I have used the bus from Sumner to Littleton and it took me an hour and a half and it's about 5k over the hill, so I know the struggle. What I'm
world's
interested in
greatest
is,
bus journey, it could be, Vicky. That's what it could be.
Yeah, let's take that challenge up. What I was interested in is, you talk about the sort of underwhelming aspiration, and for me, I sort of drill down into levels of service and the number of journeys that is sort of aspired to in the level of service per head in, you know, Christchurch. And I wonder, you know, how much engagement goes into coming up with those figures. Is it driven by communities in your experience in setting those targets, or is it driven by a sort of, I suppose, a very mechanical process in-house that sort of sets out where we feel we could get to and we're sort of a little bit cautious? I wonder what you think of that.
My honest, unfiltered view would be that I think that's a colour by numbers exercise done by people who aren't invested in the communities that the exercise is done for. And I really think that, you know, if you went and talked to the people of Littleton and engage with them, I think that you will hear a very strong depth of feeling around a desire to use public transport. But again, I point you to the value proposition. Nobody wants to use something that is, you know, that's not appealing. It needs to. It is chicken and egg, which I think is the term you used in the article. But I think that's where we need to be aspirational. We need to try and create something that people will use. We have to think of the future as well, you know, in 20, 30, 50 years. You know, where the population of Christchurch is much bigger than it is now. If the decisions that we make now can really set us up for the future, even though they might be painful in the short term. But I really sense if you came and talked to our board or talked to the people of Littleton, you'll find a very, very passionate group of people who want to see public transport at the top of ECAN's agenda, or all of our local government.
That's lovely. I'm wholeheartedly behind you as well. So thanks very much for bringing this to us.
Thank you. Appreciate the time.
Thank you, Vicky. Thank you, Tyrone, for once again for taking the time to come in this afternoon after the hassles that and the frustration you had this morning. But we do really appreciate that you have backed up your written submission with a face-to-face submission in this new world that we're operating in. So thank you very, very much
experience.
on behalf of all the council. Yes, it is for all of us.
Much appreciated.
But yes, thank you very much. Have a good day.
You too.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you.
Okay, so just before we leave, I'd like to thank all the councillors and staff that have maintained a whole afternoon sitting here listening to this. But yeah, just thank everybody for the participation this afternoon. I think it's gone very well. And I would just like to now pass over to Craig to close the day's meeting. Thank you, Craig.
Ai, tēnā koutou, e rauranga tērā mā. Ka tautoko au te mihi Claire ki a mātou. Ai, e mahi aua tēnei ahi. Ai, ka pai koutou. Ki a koe, Claire, mō tō mahi kaiwhakahaere o tātou nei hui tēnei ahi, tēnā koe. Ki a kolua ki Louise, mō tō mahi I muri, tēnei timi ki a koe. So just thanking Claire and especially Louise for helping us with everything behind the scenes, and Claire for leading the way today, and everyone for their attendance. Wow, yeah, what a session. So, but very important and very good to get all the feedback we got. So, ai he karakia whakamutunga o tātou nei wā. Tūtaua mai rangi, tūtaua mai I raro, tūtaua mai I roto, tūtaua mai I waho. Kia tau ai te mauri tū, te mauri ora, kia koutou katoa, haumie, huie, tākie.
Tā.
Kia ora koutou.
Oh, okay, thank you very much, everybody. I think there might be some reading coming on our emails, so we'll see you all bright and early in the morning. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Claire. Louise.
Thanks,
cheers.
Claire. Well, cheers.